Welcome, my dear friends. If you like the video, please comment below and hit that like button. For more exciting and informative videos, subscribe and ring the bell for updates. Your support truly helps us grow and reach more people. Thank you. Let's dive in. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a presence, thick and heavy, pressing in on me like the humid air of a summer storm. I'd come to Blackwood National Forest to escape the relentless noise of the city, the clatter of keyboards, the drone of traffic, the echo of arguments that still rang in the hollow chambers of my recently emptied house. Divorce had a way of amplifying silence, turning it from a comfort into a weapon. I was Mark Jenkins, mid-40s, accountant, and now officially alone. They called Blackwood unspoiled wilderness, a phrase that sounded enticing on brochures, less so when you were actually swallowed by its dense old-growth trees. The Forest Service map had marked it as primitive. Code for expect nothing, rely on yourself, perfect. I needed to rely on myself, to rediscover that part of me that hadn't been eroded by spreadsheets and shared checking accounts. Setting up camp was a methodical exercise, a ritual of self-sufficiency. Tent pitched, sleeping bag unrolled, fire pit. Ringed with stones, ID gathered from the creek bed. Each task, each small accomplishment, felt like a tiny victory over the inertia of depression that had been clinging to me for months. As dusk began to bleed into the sky, painting the towering pines in shades of bruised purple and deep green, the silence deepened. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature, it was something else, something deliberate. Back in the city, silence was a luxury, a fleeting moment snatched between sirens and shouting. Here in Blackwood, it was the default setting. A constant, and as night closed in, it began to feel less like a refuge and more like a cage. The usual forest sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, they all seemed muted, as if a celestial volume knob was being slowly, relentlessly turned down. I built a fire, piling on dry branches until it roared to life, spitting sparks into the encroaching darkness. The flames danced and crackled, a defiant burst of sound against the growing stillness. It helped for a while. The warmth seeped into my chilled bones. The flickering light pushed back the encroaching shadows, and the sound, however small, was a reassurance. But even the fire couldn't fully conquer the silence. It was like the flames were burning in a vacuum, their sounds contained, unable to penetrate the oppressive quiet that surrounded them. As the fire dwindled, the silence intensified, becoming almost tactile. It felt like pressure against my eardrums, a physical weight that made my skin prickle. The animal sounds, which had been faint to begin with, ceased altogether. Even the wind, which had been whispering through the pines earlier, seemed to have died down, leaving the air heavy and stagnant. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the altitude, the dense tree cover, some strange atmospheric condition. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew that this wasn't natural. This wasn't the silence of nature, it was something else. Unsettled, I retreated to my tent, zipping the flap closed against the deepening night. The nylon walls offered little comfort. If anything, the tent amplified the silence, turning it into a suffocating blanket. Inside, the quiet was absolute, broken only by the frantic thump-thump-thump of my own heart. That's when I started hearing them, the faint, almost subliminal sounds within the silence. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the product of an overstressed mind seeking patterns in the void. But they persisted. Whispers just beyond the threshold of hearing, rustling noises, too subtle to be wind, faint clicks and snaps that seemed to originate from just outside the tent walls, yet nowhere specific. They were ephemeral, indistinct, always on the edge of perception, teasing my senses, driving me slowly towards the brink of paranoia. Were they animal sounds distorted and muffled by the unnatural silence? Or something else? Something listening? Well, the thought sent a fresh wave of icy dread through me. I fumbled for my phone, a desperate, futile gesture. No signal, of course. Blackwood was a digital dead zone, a place where the modern world retreated, leaving you face to face with something older, something wilder. I switched on the flashlight, its beam a weak yellow finger against the encroaching black. It offered little comfort, illuminating only the immediate interior of the tent, the thin nylon walls, the claustrophobic space that suddenly felt like a coffin, driven by a desperate need to break the silence. To reassure myself that I wasn't losing my mind, I decided to build the fire back up. Maybe the noise, the activity, would dispel this creeping unease. I unzipped the tent flap, the silence outside hitting me like a physical blow. It was colder now, the air biting at my exposed skin. The embers of the fire glowed faintly, casting weak, flickering shadows. As I gathered more wood, piling it onto the embers, the silence seemed to intensify, to push back against the intrusion of sound. The flames struggled to catch, sputtering and hissing as if the very air was reluctant to burn. When the fire finally roared to life, I felt a brief surge of relief, a momentary victory over the oppressive stillness. But even the crackling flames seemed muted, their sound swallowed by the surrounding quiet. It was like shouting into a void, the noise dissipating before it could truly register, leaving behind only a deeper, more profound silence. It was then I remembered the music on my phone. A ridiculous idea, perhaps, to combat the silence with artificial noise, but at that point any sound was better than none. I fumbled for my phone again, this time managing to switch it on, selecting a playlist at random. I turned the volume up full blast, the tinny speakers of the phone spitting out a blast of rock music that felt jarringly out of place in the ancient forest. For a moment the music seemed to push back the silence, the driving beat and distorted guitars a defiant shout against the encroaching quiet. But it was a fleeting victory. Almost immediately the silence began to absorb the music, to swallow it whole. The sound became muffled, distorted, as if the silence itself was actively working to suppress it. Within minutes, the music was reduced to a faint, tinny drone, barely audible above the crackling fire, and somehow even more unsettling than the absolute quiet that had preceded it. The silence was winning. It was consuming everything, absorbing sound, light, even hope. Desperate, I decided to venture slightly into the woods, flashlight in hand. Maybe if I could pinpoint the source of this unnatural quiet, if I could find some logical explanation, I could regain some sense of control. I stepped away from the firelight, the darkness swallowing me whole almost instantly. The beam of my flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the black, illuminating only the immediate trees, their trunks looming like silent sentinels. The silence was absolute now, deeper than anything I'd ever experienced, a void that seemed to press against my eardrums to resonate in my bones. I walked slowly, cautiously, my flashlight beam sweeping from side to side, searching for what? I didn't know. Any sign of life, any break in the unnatural stillness, any explanation for the creeping dread that was tightening its grip on my chest. Then it happened. A single, sharp snap of a twig directly behind me. So close it made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I whirled around, flashlight beam, stabbing into the darkness, my breath catching in my chest. Nothing, just trees and shadows, the fog swirling like ghosts among the trunks. The absolute, oppressive silence. I strained my eyes, my ears, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of what had snapped that twig. Nothing. Just empty darkness. My rational mind screamed at me to return to the fire, to the relative safety of the campsite. This was foolish, reckless, driven by fear and paranoia. But something else, a darker, more primal impulse urged me to stay, to investigate, to confront whatever was lurking in the silence. I took a tentative step forward, then another, deeper into the woods. The flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. The silence pressing in on me, suffocating me, and then I heard them. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps, circling my campsite. Not running, not crashing through the undergrowth like an animal, but slow, measured, almost thoughtful. Footsteps in the absolute silence, circling my tent while I stood here, alone in the woods. My flashlight beam revealing nothing but empty darkness. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't alone. Something was out there. In the silence, circling my camp, listening, waiting. my training, my experience, my carefully constructed facade of rationality, all crumbled away, leaving behind only pure, unadulterated terror. I turned and ran, back towards the campsite, back towards the firelight, back towards what I desperately hoped was still some semblance of safety. The footsteps behind me quickened, matching my pace, circling, always circling, never getting closer, never falling behind. I burst back into the clearing, the firelight a beacon in the oppressive darkness. My flashlight beam danced wildly as I scanned the perimeter of my campsite, heart-pounding, breath-ragged, expecting to see what? A bear? A mountain lion? Something human? But the beam revealed only empty darkness. Nothing. Just trees and shadows, and the fire crackling in the unnatural silence, and those heavy, deliberate footsteps still circling, unseen, unheard except for the faint rustle of leaves, the almost subliminal disturbance of the forest floor. Terror lent me a frantic energy. Rational thought had abandoned me completely. I had to get out of here now. I began tearing down my camp. Fueled by adrenaline and pure, unreasoning fear, tent collapsed and stuffed haphazardly into its bag. Sleeping bag and gear thrown into the RV. Fire doused with frantic kicks of dirt, everything moving in a blur of panicked motion. The silence intensified with every movement, as if the forest itself was disapproving of my escape, trying to hold me back. The footsteps continued to circle, unseen, unheard, except for the faint rustle of leaves, the almost subliminal disturbance of the forest floor, a constant haunting presence in the oppressive quiet. I scrambled into the RV, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, the sound deafening in the unnatural silence, a defiant burst of noise that felt both liberating and terrifying. I slammed the RV into gear and tore out of the campsite, the tires spitting gravel, the headlights cutting a swath through the fog. The circling footsteps faded behind me, swallowed by the roar of the engine. But the silence remained, a constant companion in the cab of the RV, pressing in on me, suffocating me. A constant, haunting reminder of something predatory and unseen lurking within the stillness of the deep woods. I drove through the pre-dawn hours, not stopping, not slowing down, just driving. Away from Blackwood, away from the silence, away from the unseen footsteps and the whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and pink, I finally reached the highway, the familiar rumble of traffic a welcome, almost overwhelming sound. Head in the city, surrounded by the cacophony of urban life, the constant noise of humanity. I should have felt safe, relieved. But the silence was still there. In my mind, a constant, haunting presence, a whisper in the back of my thoughts, a chilling reminder of something predatory and unseen lurking within the stillness of the deep woods, a silence that I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, would never truly leave me. I never camped alone again, and even now, years later, whenever I find myself in a quiet place, a park, a library, even my own apartment in the dead of night, I find myself listening for the stillness between sounds, the unnatural silence that hints at something far more terrifying than any wild animal, something that waits and watches and listens in the deep, dark woods. It started with the trees, as these things often do. Not in any dramatic crashing to the ground way, but subtly, insidiously, like a shift in the wind that you can't quite place. But no is different, wrong. We were hiking Hemlock Trail, Liam and I, or, more accurately, what was supposed to be Hemlock Trail. The official maps of Redwood National Preserve showed Hemlock Trail clearly marked, a reassuring green line snaking through the dense, ancient forest. But the trail Wed decided to take, the one that had whispered promises of untouched wilderness and views that would blow your mind according to some online forum, well, that one wasn't on any map ID ever seen. "You sure about this, Ben?" Liam asked, his voice a low rumble that barely cut through the rustle of redwood needles underfoot. Liam, ever the cautious one, the pragmatic counterpoint to my sometimes reckless enthusiasm. He was already scanning the tree line, his eyes sharp and observant, taking in details I often missed in my eagerness to push forward. Relax, O'Connell, he'd said, slapping him on the back. Maybe a little too hard. It's just a bit off the beaten path. That's the whole point, right? Get away from the crowd, see something real. Liam didn't look convinced. He never did, not at first. But he trusted me. Or at least he trusted my instincts enough to follow. Even when his own were screaming caution. That was Liam, loyal to a fault. Even when that fault was my sometimes questionable judgment. Wed started that morning full of the usual hiker's optimism. The kind that bubbles up with the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. With the initial part of Hemlock Trail, the mapped part, had been exactly as advertised, breathtaking. Towering redwoods scraped the sky, their bark the color of burnt cinnamon, sunlight filtering down in dappled shafts that turned the forest floor into a mosaic of light and shadow. Tourists, yes, there were tourists. Families with brightly colored backpacks, couples holding hands, their laughter echoing faintly through the trees. But even they couldn't diminish the majesty of the place. It was after we veered off the marked trail, following a barely discernible deer path that promised a shortcut to, well, to somewhere more interesting, at least in my head, that things started to change. The tourist vanished. The laughter faded. The sunlight seemed to dim, even though the sky remained clear above the canopy. And then we saw the trees. At first at one standing slightly apart from the others. Its bark marred by what looked like crude carvings. Geometric shapes mostly. Lines and angles that intersected in unsettling ways. I stopped, intrigued. Look at that, I said, pointing. Some kind of folk art, maybe. Liam frowned, his eyes narrowed, studying the markings. Folk art? Ben, this is Redwood National Preserve, not exactly known for its roadside attractions. I shrugged, dismissing his skepticism. Maybe some local kids, bored rangers. Who knows, it's different anyway. I was already moving closer. Drawn in by the strangeness of it, the unexpected intrusion of something man-made in this otherwise pristine wilderness. Up close, the carvings were more detailed, more intricate than I'd initially thought. They were just random scratches. They were deliberate, precise, almost ritualistic. Alongside the geometric shapes were distorted figures that vaguely resembled animals, but twisted, elongated, their limbs bent at unnatural angles. One in particular caught my eye, a deer-like creature, but with too many legs, its antlers branching out into sharp, jagged points. Okay, Liam said, his voice losing its usual light-hearted tone. That's not kids. That's weird. I had to admit. Even I was starting to feel a prickle of unease, but curiosity, that insatiable hiker's itch to explore the unknown, was stronger. Come on, I said, let's see if there are any more. And there were, more trees marked in the same unsettling way. Not every tree, but enough to create a pattern, a sense of intention. As we hiked deeper, the marked trees became more frequent, the symbols more elaborate. The geometric shapes grew more complex, resembling intricate knots or mazes. The animalistic figures became more distorted, less recognizable, morphing into something else, something unsettlingly alien. Ben, Liam said again, his voice tighter now. I don't like this. This doesn't feel right. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously between the trees. The feeling of being watched, that subtle prickling sensation on the back of your neck, had begun to creep in. It was faint at first, easily dismissed as hiker's paranoia, the product of too much time alone in the woods. But it grew steadily stronger, more insistent, until it became an almost tangible weight pressing down on us. It's probably just some eccentric, I said, the word sounding hollow even to my own ears. Eccentric didn't cover it. Eccentric didn't explain the growing sense of dread that was settling in my stomach, the way the forest itself seemed to be changing around us. The air grew heavier, the shadows deeper. The temperature seemed to drop even though the sun was still visible through the thinning canopy. The silence, already profound, deepened further until it felt like a physical pressure in our ears. The rustling of leaves, the call of birds, the distant murmur of the creek we had been following, all of it faded, replaced by an oppressive stillness that was more unsettling than any noise. Then we found the carcasses. The first one was small, easily missed if you weren't paying attention, a rabbit, its body splayed out on the forest floor, its fur matted with dried blood. But it wasn't the rabbit itself that made my stomach clench, it was the way it was arranged. Its limbs were positioned at unnatural angles, its head twisted to face directly away from the trail, as if deliberately posed. "What the hell?" Liam muttered, kneeling beside it, poking it gingerly with a trekking pole. We moved on, trying to dismiss it as a predator kill, though something about the scene felt staged. Then we found another and another. Squirrels, birds, even a larger animal, a raccoon maybe. Each body arranged in the same unsettling way, limbs contorted, heads turned away from the trail, always near the marked trees. "Ben, we need to go back," Liam said, his voice urgent now, all trace of caution replaced by genuine fear. "This isn't right. This is wrong." And for the first time I couldn't argue. The curiosity, the bravado, the desire to impress it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that whispered that we had stumbled into something we didn't understand. Something ancient and territorial, and something that was very, very angry. We turned to backtrack, to retrace our steps, to find the deer path that had led us off the map trail. But the trail wasn't there, or at least not where it should have been. The forest floor was a confusing tangle of fallen leaves and undergrowth. Familiar landmarks, distinctive trees or rock formations were gone, replaced by an unsettling sameness. It was as if the forest itself had shifted, rearranged, erasing our path behind us. "Shit," I muttered, pulling out the map, though I already knew it was useless. The green line of Hemlock Trail, so reassuring just hours ago, now seemed like a cruel joke. We were off the map, lost in a wilderness that was no longer recognizable. The marked trees were still there, though. It's more frequent now, more numerous, their carved symbols seeming to mock us, to encircle us, to close in. And as the last rays of sunlight faded through the canopy, plunging the forest into a premature twilight, we realized something truly terrifying. The symbols weren't just markings on trees. They were a boundary. We had crossed it, and now we were trapped. Night fell with a speed that felt unnatural, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight in a matter of minutes. The forest, already unsettlingly silent, became utterly still. The air grew colder, the fog thickening until it swirled around our ankles, obscuring the ground, blurring the edges of the trees. And then we heard it. Rustling, snapping, not the random sounds of forest creatures moving through the undergrowth. These were deliberate, investigative, purposeful. They circled us just beyond the reach of our flashlights, moving in patterns that mirrored the geometric symbols on the trees. It wasn't the sound of animals, it was the sound of something watching. Studying, closing in. "Flashlights off?" Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. Maybe if we stay still, it'll go away." We switched off our lights, plunging ourselves into absolute darkness. The silence was broken only by our ragged breathing, and the rustling, snapping sounds that continued to circle us, growing closer with each passing minute. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting, listening. And then, just when the tension became unbearable, when I felt like my heart was going to explode from my chest, the sound stopped. Silence, absolute silence. More terrifying than any noise. We stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. As the darkness pressed in on us, heavy and suffocating, the fog swirled around us, cold and damp. And then from somewhere just beyond the edge of the clearing, we heard it again. But this time, it wasn't rustling. It wasn't snapping. It was a different sound entirely. A sound that made my blood run cold, a sound that spoke to something primal, something deep within my DNA, something that screamed of ancient territories and unseen guardians and the terrible price of trespassing. It was the sound of breathing. But not human breathing. It's not animal breathing. Something else, something vast, slow, deliberate. Something that was close. Too close, and then with a snap of twigs and a rustle of leaves we knew. We were surrounded. "Run," Liam hissed. The word barely a whisper, but it was enough. We didn't need to be told twice. We turned and ran, blindly, desperately, crashing through the underbrush, abandoning our gear, our tents, everything. Compass, yes, Liam had the compass, thank God. He led the way, navigating by instinct and the faint glow of the compass needle, running through the darkness guided only by sheer panic. Branches whipped at our faces, roots snagged at our feet. The ground beneath us was uneven and treacherous. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. Behind us, we could hear it moving, not chasing exactly, but keeping pace. That slow, deliberate breathing. The rustling, snapping sounds always just behind us. A constant reminder of the unseen presence that was hurting us, guiding us, driving us deeper into the forest. We ran for hours, it felt like, though time lost all meaning in that frantic flight. Eventually, blessedly, we stumbled upon something, a faint track, barely more than a deer trail, but wider, smoother than the forest floor. A logging road, maybe. We followed it, stumbling, falling, pushing ourselves beyond exhaustion. The compass needle spun wildly, useless in this disorienting darkness. But we kept moving, putting one foot in front of the other, driven by the primal urge to escape, to survive. Finally, as the first faint streaks of dawn began to bleed into the eastern sky, we saw it lights. Faint, distant, but lights nonetheless. Civilization. Salvation. We stumbled toward them, our legs heavy, our lungs burning, our bodies aching, but hope surging through us like a jolt of electricity. It was a ranger station. A small, isolated outpost, barely more than a cabin in the woods, but to us it was a beacon of hope in the vast darkness. We collapsed on the porch, gasping for breath, our clothes torn, our faces scratched, our bodies trembling from exhaustion and terror. The ranger, a grizzled old-timer with eyes that had seen too much of the wilderness, listened to our story with a skeptical frown. Marked trees? Strange symbols? Unseen presence? He shook his head slowly. Hiker's paranoia, he said. Lost your way, got spooked by the dark, it happens all the time. He offered us coffee, dry clothes, a ride back to town. He filed a report, a routine missing hiker incident. Nothing to suggest anything out of the ordinary. He didn't believe us, of course. No one would, but we knew what we'd seen. We knew what we'd heard. We knew what had been waiting for us in those marked trees. Back in civilization, the world seemed wrong. Too bright, too loud, too normal. The symbols haunted me. They were everywhere I looked, in the patterns of shadows on the sidewalk, in the lines of cracks in the pavement, in the branches of trees swaying in the wind. I started researching folklore, local legends, anything that might explain what we'd encountered. I found stories, whispers, hints of ancient territories, unseen guardians, things that lurked in the deep woods, things that didn't want to be disturbed. Liam changed. He became even more cautious, more reserved. He refused to talk about that night, about the marked trees, about the unseen presence. He stopped hiking altogether. The wilderness, once a source of solace and adventure for him, had become a place of fear. A reminder of the untamed darkness that lay just beneath the surface of the world. He'd learned his lesson, he said. Learned to respect the boundaries, the hidden dangers, the things that were better left undisturbed. And the marked trees, they remain, I imagine. Somewhere deep in the Redwood National Preserve, silent sentinels guarding their ancient territory. A chilling reminder of the boundaries humans should not cross. The unseen forces that watch and wait, and the terrifying price of curiosity. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the shadows grow long, I still see them in my mind's eye, those trees, marked with symbols that whisper of something ancient and terrible, something that's still out there, waiting in the deep woods, listening for the sound of footsteps that strayed too far from the path. You ever stop to think about what silence really is? Not just the absence of noise, but the thing itself, the presence of it. Out here in Whispering Pines, you get to know silence intimately. You get to know it like a shadow. Always there, just at the edge of your hearing. Waiting to, well, I'm still not sure what it's waiting for. My name's Dan Reynolds, and until a few weeks ago I was fresh meat, green as pine needles, straight out of Ranger Academy. Sooty boy, eager to prove myself, thought I knew the wilderness, because I DX survival training and could identify every tree in the damn park by its bark. They stuck me out here at Station 7. Said it was understaffed, needed someone dedicated. I figured it was a test, some kind of initiation. Turns out it was more like a sentence. My first task? Auditing old logbooks. Decades of them gathering dust in the station's archive room, a glorified closet, really. smelling of mildew and regret. Bureaucratic busy work, I thought. A way to break in the new guy, but hey, paperwork's paperwork, right? And it's a paycheck. Besides, I figured it was a chance to get a feel for the place, the history, the vibe. The first few books were exactly what I expected: weather reports, trail maintenance schedules, the occasional bear sighting, lost hikers, the usual park ranger fare. Mundane, predictable, reassuringly normal. Then I got to Thorne's logbooks. Ranger Elias Thorne. Stationed here, let's see entries span from 1998 to 2003. 5 years out here, 5 years that changed him, if these books are anything to go by. At first, Thorne's entries were just like the others. Factual, professional, a little dry. He noted the weather, trail conditions, visitor numbers, any incidents: a fallen tree blocking the north trail, a couple of hikers caught unprepared in a sudden downpour, a black bear getting into the picnic area's trash cans. Routine stuff. But then, about 6 months into his first year, the tone shifted. Subtly at first, almost imperceptibly. He started mentioning sounds. Strange sounds it might. Unusual nocturnal activity, he wrote in one entry. Persistent rustling around the station after dark. No visible signs of animals. Could be deer, but behavior atypical. A few weeks later, another entry: sounds again last night, more pronounced. Like whispers, hard to define. Wind maybe, playing tricks in the pines. Station seems colder at night, even with heater running. I almost dismissed it then. Figured Thorne was just a bit jumpy, maybe lonely out here. Isolation can do things to a person's head, I knew that much. But then the mentions of the sounds became more frequent, more insistent. Whispers again, closer now. It's distinctly auditory, not wind. Like voices just below threshold of understanding. Tried radio check with headquarters. Static only. Equipment malfunctions became a recurring theme. Radio static, flickering lights, compass needles spinning wildly. Even his truck refusing to start on several occasions. He'd troubleshoot, check connections, replace batteries, but the problems persisted, seemingly localized to the station itself and the immediate surrounding area. Radio dead again tonight. Replaced antenna, checked power supply. Nothing. Complete static. Feels deliberate, like something is blocking the signal. Something here. Thorne started sleeping less, his entries becoming more erratic. His handwriting, initially neat and precise, began to deteriorate. Slanting across the page, words crammed together, sentences fragmented. Feeling watched, constantly, day and night. Not just animals, something else. Can't shake it, eyes in the woods. Hear them, whispering my name, Dan, Dan, just at the edge of hearing. Driving me mad, my own name, Dan. It jumped off the page at me, Thorne's frantic scrawl blurring before my eyes. I rubbed them, telling myself it was just coincidence. A common name. But the feeling of unease was growing. A cold knot tightening in my stomach. The logbooks became Thorne's descent into paranoia. A slow-motion train wreck documented in increasingly desperate entries. He wrote about seeing shadows out of the corner of his eye. Figures moving just beyond the firelight. He started carrying his service weapon everywhere, even inside the station. Screams last night, not animal, too articulate. Like someone in agony or mocking. Echoes, that's what they are. Echoes of something ancient, something listening. The echoes became central to his entries. A constant, insidious presence. He described them as auditory hallucinations at first. Tricks of the mind in the isolation, but then they became more tangible. Echoes are clearer now. Words, almost words. Just can't quite grasp. It's there in my head inside. Radio static synced with them. Pulsing, voices in the static. Distorted, laughing, mocking. They know my fear, they feed on it. Must stay strong. His entries devolved into near incoherence, fragmented thoughts. Repeated phrases, desperate pleas. Trapped station alive. Walls listening. Echoes everywhere. Can't escape, they know, they know. They know, and then the last entry, dated July 15th, 2003, barely legible, scrawled in what looked like near darkness. They hear me now. The echoes are inside. No escape. That was it. The logbook ended there, abruptly, mid-sentence. I sat back in my chair, the dusty logbook heavy in my hands, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was just stories, I told myself, the ramblings of a man driven mad by isolation. Ranger Thorne was probably transferred, reassigned, maybe got some help. It was just a job, just a park, just trees. But the silence in the archive room suddenly felt heavier, the shadows in the corners deeper. I glanced out the small, dusty window. Dusk was settling, the long shadows of the pines stretching across the clearing, swallowing the sunlight. The forest outside seemed to press closer, listening. That night I experienced the echoes myself. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, just like Thorne described. Faint whispers, barely audible at the edge of my hearing. I was in the main room of the station, going over Thorne's logbooks again, trying to find some rational explanation, some clue that would explain his descent into madness. The station was quiet, the generator humming softly in the background, the only sound the rustle of pages as I turned them. And then I heard it. Just a whisper, a breath of sound too indistinct to be words, but familiar. Like my name? Barely there. Just a phantom sound, easily dismissed. Wind, I told myself, wind in the eaves. Old building, lots of drafts, but then it came again, clearer this time, closer. Then I froze, my pen stilling on the page, my breath catching in my throat. It was my name whispered, just outside the station, carried on the evening air. I told myself it was the wind, still, playing tricks in the pines. Just like Thorne wrote. But the air was still, no breeze, no rustling leaves. Silence, except for that whisper. Then I stood up, my chair scraping against the wooden floor, the sound echoing too loudly in the sudden silence. I walked to the window, peering out into the gathering darkness. Shadows stretched long and black from the pines, the clearing bathed in the pale light of the rising moon. Nothing moved, no one there. Just trees and shadows and silence. I went back to the logbooks, trying to focus, to find something, anything. To distract myself from the growing unease, I read Thorne's entries again. His descriptions of the whispers, the feelings of being watched, the equipment malfunctions. Coincidence, I told myself? All coincidence. But my hands were shaking, my heart pounding, and the silence in the station felt oppressive. The radio crackled to life, startling me. Static. Just static, pulsing, rhythmic, like a heartbeat or echoes. I reached for the handset, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic. "Dispatch, Station 7, radio check," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. Static, louder now, pulsing. Throbbing. And then through the static, a sound. Faint, distorted, barely audible, but voices. Whispering, my name. Dan Turai slammed the handset back into its cradle, cutting off the static, the voices, the echoes. Silence again, heavy, waiting. I told myself it was just radio interference, atmospheric conditions, solar flares, anything but what Thorne wrote. But his words echoed in my mind, insistent, terrifying. Echoes are inside, they hear me now. No escape. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, isolation, the power of suggestion. Thorne's entries, reading them for hours, they were getting to me, planting ideas in my head, making me susceptible. It was psychological, all psychological. But the cold dread in my stomach felt anything but psychological. Footsteps outside, slow, deliberate crunching on the gravel path leading to the station door. No one should be out there. Not at this hour, not in this silence. My hand went instinctively to my service weapon, holstered at my hip. Foolish, I knew, to think a gun could protect me from echoes. But it was something, anything, to hold on to in the rising tide of fear. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Silence again stretched tight, like a wire about to snap. I held my breath, listening, every nerve in my body screaming. Nothing, just silence, and then a soft sound, barely audible, right outside the door. A whisper. My name, Dan. I couldn't take it anymore. Panic flared, hot and sharp. Overwhelming reason, logic, everything. Thorne's logbooks, his frantic warnings, his final desperate entry, they were all I could think about. He'd succumbed, hadn't he, to the echoes, and now they were here. For me, backup. I needed backup. Radio. I grabbed the handset again, my fingers fumbling, clumsy with fear. Dispatch Station 7, emergency situation, requesting immediate backup. Repeat emergency situation, static. Just static, pulsing, throbbing, laced with voices. Laughing, mocking. Dan, the radio is useless. Just like Thorne said. Deliberate, blocked. Trapped, no escape. Thorne's final words echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy. They hear me now, the echoes are inside. No escape. Escape, that was the only option left. Flee. Get out of the station, out of Whispering Pines, as far away from the echoes as possible. Rational? No. But survival isn't always rational. Sometimes it's just instinct. I grabbed my keys, my flashlight, my weapon, and moved to the back door, away from the front, away from whatever was out there. The back door led to a narrow service path, overgrown with weeds, leading into the deeper woods, away from the clearing, away from the road, away from safety. No, safety wasn't here. Safety was anywhere but here. I slipped out the back door, into the darkness, into the echoes. The night air was colder than ever, the fog thicker, swirling around my ankles like grasping hands. The whispers started again, louder now, clearer, no longer just at the edge of hearing, but all around me, inside me, in my head. Dan, I started to run, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots tripping my feet. The flashlight beam danced wildly ahead, a feeble circle of light swallowed by the darkness. The whispers intensified. No longer whispers now, but voices. Many voices. Murmuring, chanting, mocking. My name over and over, a chorus of echoes. Dan, footsteps behind me. Not mine, heavier, faster, relentless. Pursuit, they were chasing me. The echoes were chasing me. The whispers turned to laughter, high, thin, mocking, just like ID heard on the trail. Just like Thorne wrote. No escape, they laughed, the voices echoing in my head and the trees and the very air around me. No escape, no escape. No escape, I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until my vision blurred, but I couldn't stop, couldn't slow down, couldn't let them catch me. The station was behind me now, swallowed by the darkness, a silent tomb, a monument to Thorne's madness or his sanity. I didn't know anymore, I just ran. The pre-dawn light began to filter through the trees, a pale, watery gray that offered little comfort. The echoes hadn't stopped, hadn't faded, hadn't relented. They were still there, all around me, inside me. A constant, relentless presence. But the pursuit had slowed, the footsteps fainter, the laughter more distant. Or maybe I was just getting used to it, my mind numbing itself to the constant terror. I stumbled out of the woods, onto the access road, the logging road that led back to the highway, back to civilization. I didn't know if civilization existed anymore. Not after what he'd seen, what he'd heard, what he'd felt. I walked, then jogged, then ran again, desperate to put as much distance between myself and Whispering Pines, between myself and the echoes. I made it back to headquarters just as the sun was rising, exhausted, disheveled, barely coherent. My superiors listened to my story, or at least pretended to listen. They nodded, they frowned, they made sympathetic noises, but their eyes they held disbelief, pity, maybe even amusement. Thorne, they said, poor Ranger Thorne. Mental instability, isolation, it happens sometimes out here. His logbooks, fictionalized accounts, stress-induced hallucinations, not to be taken literally. My experience, exhaustion, stress. The power of suggestion, reading those logbooks, it got into my head, they said. Perfectly rational explanations. Perfectly dismissive. They sent a team out to Station 7 to check on things, to retrieve the logbooks, to reassure themselves, I suppose. They found nothing, of course. Station 7 was just a station, empty, dusty, unremarkable. No creatures, no echoes, no proof. Just an overactive imagination, they said. Just stress. I requested a transfer, obviously. Ed to the city, back to the noise, the crowds, the concrete. Anything but the silence of the woods, anything but the echoes. They granted it readily, eager to be rid of the crazy new ranger. Back to desk duty, back to paperwork, back to safety? No, Safety doesn't exist anymore. Not for me. I still hear them sometimes, the echoes. In the city noise, in the traffic hum, in the quiet of my apartment at night. Faint whispers just at the edge of hearing carrying my name. Dan, 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 they're always there, waiting, listening, echoing. Inside, no escape. And the logbooks? They're still out there at Station 7. Untouched, unread, silent witnesses to the echoes that wait for the next ranger, the next victim, the next listener. And they're waiting for you too, you know. Just listen, can you hear them? The echoes. It starts with that feeling, you know. Starts with that feeling, you know. That little thrill of anticipation, the kind that hums just beneath your skin when you're on the edge of something exciting. That's how it began. Our hike into Misty Mountains National Forest. 5 of us, friends, since forever. Heading out for a weekend, chasing that feeling of being untethered from the everyday. I'm Noah, by the way, Noah Miller. Early 20s, map nerd, planner. Always have been, always will be. It's how I operate. Pilgrim Creek was the destination. A place ID found tucked away in some obscure online hiking forum described as unspoiled and challenging. Challenge was exactly what we were after. Me, my girlfriend Chloe, and our friends, Liam, Maya, and Ben. We weren't rookies. We'd done our share of trails, pitched tents and storms, navigated by compass and stars. This trip, though, felt different right from the start. The fog rolled in as we were pulling into the trailhead parking lot. Not a gentle mist, but a thick, cloying blanket that swallowed the pines whole. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, frowned. "Fog advisory this morning?" she said, checking her phone, which of course had already lost signal. Maybe we should reconsider? Reconsider? That wasn't in my vocabulary. Not when ID spent weeks poring over maps, plotting our route, packing and repacking gear. I laughed it off, the sound echoing strangely in the sudden hush the fog had brought. Atmospheric, babe. Adds to the adventure, right? Liam and Maya, our resident thrill seekers, were already grinning, practically vibrating with excitement. Ben, always the quiet one, just nodded, his eyes wide and a little too bright in the gloom. Chloe, bless her heart, just sighed and laced up her boots. She's always been the anchor, the one who balances my impulsive leaps with her level-headedness. The trail started innocently enough, a well-worn path winding into the trees. The fog initially was almost beautiful, turning the familiar forest into something ethereal, dreamlike. The trail markers, sturdy wooden posts with faded blue paint, were reassuring, spaced regularly, guiding us deeper into the white embrace. "See," I said, turning to Chloe with a smug grin. "Told you it'd be fine." She just raised an eyebrow, her gaze fixed on the woods ahead. "Let's just keep an eye on things, okay?" Famous last words. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A marker missing here, another a little further on. At first I didn't think much of it. Vandalism maybe, or just natural decay. The relentless march of time and weather. But then it became more frequent. Wed round a bend, expecting to see that reassuring blue flash in the fog, and nothing. Just trees, mist, and an unnerving emptiness. "Noah," Liam called out, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "You sure we're still on track?" I pulled out my GPS, the screen flickering uselessly. "Damn fog's messing with the signal," I muttered, tapping the device impatiently. "But the trail markers, they should be here." I consulted my map, tracing our supposed route with my finger. We should have passed marker 17 about 10 minutes ago, and then 18 and 19. Maya, usually so quick with a joke, was silent, her eyes darting nervously around. Ben, his face pale now, just kept walking, his pace quickening. Chloe, though, remained calm, her gaze sharp, assessing. "Maybe they're just damaged," she suggested. But even her voice lacked conviction. Nothing. It was as if they'd simply vanished. Not broken, not fallen, just gone. The posts themselves ripped from the earth, leaving only empty holes in the leaf litter. "This isn't right," Liam said, his voice hushed. "This isn't just wear and tear, Noah. Someone's messing with these markers." Someone out here, miles from anywhere, in this suffocating fog. The idea was ridiculous, and yet the alternative was even more unsettling. The compass, when I finally thought to check it, spun wildly, a frantic needle pointing in every direction, and nowhere at once. Technology, my meticulously planned reliance on it, was failing us. The fog, it wasn't just weather anymore. It felt deliberate. "Okay," Chloe said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the rising tide of panic. "Okay, everyone, calm down, we're not lost. Not yet, we just need to backtrack. We remember the path, right? We go back the way we came, backtrack." It sounded so simple, so logical, and for a moment I felt a surge of relief. Of course we were experienced hikers. We could navigate by memory, by instinct. We didn't need markers. We turned around, retracing our steps once more, now with a grim determination. Liam and Maya, their earlier excitement completely extinguished, walked close together, their hands brushing. Ben, his breathing shallow and rapid, stumbled slightly, his eyes wide with a fear I was starting to feel mirrored in my own chest. We scanned the sides of the trail, searching for those vanished markers, for any familiar landmark, any sign that we were on the right path. But the fog was a blank canvas, erasing everything behind us as quickly as we moved, and the markers, they were gone. The path Wed walked, the markers that had guided us erased, as if the forest itself was unmaking our journey, pulling the trail back into the mist from which it had emerged. "They're gone," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "All of them. It's like the path is disappearing behind us." Disappearing. The word hung in the fog-laden air, heavy with unspoken dread. It wasn't just that we were lost. It was that something was actively, deliberately making us lost. Panic started to claw its way up my throat, a cold, suffocating grip. I, the planner, the leader, the one who always had a map and a backup plan, was utterly, terrifyingly lost. And not just geographically lost, but lost in a way that felt intentional. The fog swirled around us, thicker now, almost solid. It wasn't just obscuring our vision, it was pressing in on us. A physical weight, a suffocating presence. The sounds of the forest, which had been so comforting earlier, were now distorted, muffled, unsettling. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded amplified, too close, too sharp. Then the noises started. Faint at first, almost imagined. Whispers just at the edge of hearing carried on the swirling fog. Rustling not of leaves, but something heavier, dragging through the undergrowth just beyond the veil of mist. And then laughter. Distant, echoing, high-pitched laughter that sent shards of ice down my spine. We stopped dead, huddled together, our breath misting in the cold air. The laughter faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence, broken only by the frantic hammering of my heart. What was that?" Ben stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Liam breathed, his eyes darting wildly around. "But I don't like it." No one did. The fog wasn't just disorienting, it felt alive. Swirling, shifting, responding to our fear, to our panic. It felt like a maze, a deliberately constructed trap, and we were walking deeper and deeper into its heart. Chloe, though surprisingly, remained calm. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but her voice when she spoke was steady, almost resolute. "Look," she said, pointing ahead in a direction we hadn't planned, hadn't intended to go. "The fog, it's thinner over there." I stared, my mind still reeling, my rational brain clinging desperately to maps and compasses and logic. "But that's the wrong way. That's not where the trail is supposed to be." "The trail markers are gone, Noah," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "The GPS is useless. The compass is spinning in circles. Your maps, they're not helping us here. Maybe we need to stop relying on them." "But we don't know where that goes," I protested. The planner in me recoiling at the idea of abandoning my carefully laid routes, my meticulously crafted plans. "It could be anywhere." "And where are we now, Noah?" she asked, her voice soft, but laced with a steel idea rarely heard before. "Do you know where we are now? Because I sure as hell don't, and staying here, surrounded by this fog, listening to those noises, that's not getting us anywhere either." She was right. Brutally, Terrifyingly right. My carefully constructed world of maps and plans, of logic and control, had crumbled around me, swallowed by the fog, by the disappearing markers, by the unseen force that was manipulating our path, our fear. "Instinct, Noah?" she said, her eyes locking with mine. A plea, a challenge, a desperate hope. Maybe we need to trust our instincts. For once, instinct, that felt terrifying too, letting go of the familiar, the rational, and plunging into the unknown, guided only by what? A feeling, a hunch. But what choice did we have? The fog around us felt like a cage, closing in, the whispers and laughter echoing in the swirling mist. The path behind us erased. The markers vanished. "Okay," I said. The word barely audible. A surrender, a desperate gamble. "Okay, Chloe. Let's try your way." We moved towards the thinner fog. Away from the planned route, away from logic, away from everything I thought I knew. The fog, as Chloe had predicted, did recede. Not abruptly, but gradually, reluctantly, as if something was pulling it back, clearing a path for us. And there, emerging from the swirling mist, almost invisible at first, a faint, almost imperceptible track. Not a marked trail, not a logging road, just a path. Barely more than a deer trail worn into the undergrowth, leading us forward out of the fog toward something. We followed it, blindly, desperately. Our fear a tangible weight in the air. The path twisted and turned, leading us down a gentle slope, through a stand of skeletal trees, across a small, icy stream. It was a path that shouldn't have been there. A path that defied logic, a path that felt guided. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog lifted. Not gradually, not reluctantly, but abruptly, completely. One moment we were surrounded by an impenetrable white wall. The next, we were blinking in the sudden, sharp clarity of the late afternoon sun. We stumbled out of the trees, blinking, gasping, into a logging road. Not overgrown, not faint, but a clear, well-maintained logging road stretching out before us, leading somewhere. Exhausted, shaken, but miraculously out. Out of the fog, out of the maze, out of the terrifying, unseen grip of Pilgrim Creek. Bed in civilization. After lukewarm coffee at a dusty diner and a shaky phone call home, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. We were safe, yes. But the questions, they were just beginning. I pulled up the official trail map of Pilgrim Creek on my laptop, the familiar lines and markers reassuringly solid on the screen. And then I zoomed in to the area where we'd been, to the path we'd followed, to the markers that had vanished. Nothing. Blank space. No markers at all. No trail where we'd started. No trail where we'd been lost. No trail where we'd escaped. The markers we'd followed in, the markers that had vanished behind us, they weren't official. They weren't on the map. They were something else. Deliberately placed, deliberately removed, to lure us in, to trap us. In a wilderness that wasn't just wild but malevolent. I looked at Chloe, her face pale, her eyes still haunted, but with a quiet, unsettling knowing. Her intuition. It hadn't just saved us. It had guided us through a maze that maps and technology couldn't comprehend, couldn't even acknowledge. The wilderness, I realized, wasn't just unpredictable. It was deceptive. It could mislead, manipulate, erase its own paths, and lure you deeper and deeper into its heart, with promises of adventure, with the illusion of control, with the vanishing markers of Pilgrim Creek. And sometimes the only way out was to abandon logic, to surrender to fear, and to trust the one thing that couldn't be quantified, couldn't be manipulated: instinct. But even then, even out, even safe, the question lingered, cold and unsettling. What exactly had been leading us deeper into the woods? And what exactly had Chloe's intuition led us away from? The fog had lifted, but the mist of fear, of doubt, of the unknowable, it that lingered on. The mountains have a way of keeping secrets. I've learned that much over the years. Some secrets are whispered on the wind, rustling through the pines, and some are carved into the very stones, silent and waiting. But the worst secrets, the ones that truly chill you to the bone, are the ones you hear crackling over a radio, carried on static and desperation. My name's Jacob Miller, though most folks just call me Jake. I'm a fire lookout, been stationed at Eagle Peak Tower for 27 seasons now. Late 50s, weathered face, eyes that have seen too much sky and too much forest fire, and not a romantic about the wilderness, not anymore. It's my job, plain and simple. Keep an eye on the Sentinel Range, spot smoke. Report it, solitude suits me. The rhythm of the seasons, the panoramic view from my little metal cage, perched high above the world. Eagle Peak Tower, she's an old girl. Built back in the 40s, all steel and rivets, creaking in the wind like an old ship at sea. But she's sturdy, reliable. More reliable than people, that's for damn sure. Up here, you're alone with your thoughts, your radio, and the endless green and gray that stretches out to the horizon. Most days it's quiet. Days bleed into weeks, marked only by the changing light, the shift in the wind, the occasional hawk circling overhead. The radio's mostly static, punctuated by routine weather reports from dispatch. Maybe some ranger chatter about trail maintenance or bear sightings. Then Anna Reed started transmitting from Raven's Nest Tower. Raven's Nest? It's a newer tower, further north, deeper into the Sentinel Range. Rookie station usually manned by summer hires. Kids fresh out of college, full of piss and vinegar and romantic notions about the wilderness. Anna Reed, her file said, 23. Recent forestry grad. Eager to prove herself, I remember thinking, good luck, kid. The mountains have a way of chewing up enthusiasm and spitting out something different. Her first transmissions were textbook ranger routine. Weather checks, visibility reports, equipment status. Crisp professional voice, a little too cheerful maybe, but that's rookie ranger for you. Then maybe a week into her rotation, the transmission started to change. Civil at first, dispatch Raven's Nest checking in. Riv clear, winds light, temperature holding steady, dispatch. Did you copy? A longer pause than usual, a faint rustle in the background. Dispatch Raven's Nest, do you read? Raven's Nest, this is dispatch, read you 5x5. Mary's voice calm and steady. Dispatch always sounded like the world was perfectly normal even when it wasn't. Dispatch, just checking in. Everything's fine here? Just, verifying radio signal strength. Raven's Nest out. Verifying radio signal strength. Bullshit. Rookie mistake trying to cover up something. I figured she was spooked by a bear maybe. Or just the isolation getting to her. First time alone in a tower can do that to you. Makes your mind play tricks, I let it slide. Rookie rangers learn quick or they don't last, but the transmissions kept getting off. Dispatch Raven's Nest. Weather update, sky cloudy, wind erratic. Dispatch, did you copy? Erratic like something's moving them, not wind. Dispatch. Raven's Nest, dispatch, winds are light and variable as per forecast. Please confirm your location and current weather conditions, Ranger Reed. Mary, a little sharper now, picking up on it too. Location Raven's Nest, conditions not right, dispatch. Do you ever feel like you're being watched? Even when you're alone? Dispatch, her voice was thinner now, a tremor creeping in. Raven's Nest, dispatch, please stick to protocol, Ranger Reed. Report weather conditions as requested, and Ranger Reed, are you feeling all right? Silence, then barely audible, a whisper, they're watching. Raven's Nest, dispatch. Ranger Reed, repeat last transmission. Ranger Reed, do you copy? Just static after that, Mary tried again and again, but Raven's Nest was silent. I keyed my own mic, Raven's Nest, Eagle Peak. Anna, you copy. It's Jake from Eagle Peak, you reading me? Nothing but hiss and crackle. Dispatch, Eagle Peak, did you lose Raven's Nest? Eagle Peak dispatch. Affirmative, lost Raven's Nest transmission about 5 minutes ago. Possible equipment malfunction. We're attempting to re-establish contact. Mary again, still calm, still professional. Dispatch Eagle Peak. I copied some of Raven's Nest's last transmissions. Sounded off, Ranger Reed might be having some trouble up there. Suggest you initiate a wellness check. Eagle Peak, dispatch. Noted well monitor Raven's Nest and consider a check if contact isn't re-established. Dispatch out wellness check. Code for rookie ranger freaking out in the woods. Happens all the time. Isolation, the vastness of the forest, it gets to some people. Makes them see things, hear things. I'd seen it before. Dismissed it. Anna Reed was just another rookie cracking under the pressure, but the transmissions continued, and they got worse. At no Eagle Peak is anyone. Is anyone out there? It's Raven's Nest, Anna. Please, can anyone hear me? The animals, they're wrong. They're all watching. Dispatch, they're not animals anymore. Eagle Peak, help me. Her voice was strained, ragged. On the edge of panic. Raven's Nest, Eagle Peak. Anna, it's Jake. What's going on up there? What do you mean, the animals? I tried to keep my voice calm, even the voice of experience, of reason, static. Then a sob, choked down, barely audible. They're there in the shadows, everywhere, dispatch. I saw one by the tower. Dispatch, it wasn't natural. Its eyes, Eagle Peak, they're glowing. Help me, Raven's Nest, Eagle Peak. Anna, listen to me. Take deep breaths. You're probably just stressed, dehydrated. Stay inside the tower, lock the door. Everything will be all right. Just breathe, Anna. Lies. All lies? But what else could I say? What else could I do from Eagle Peak, miles away, separated by miles of wilderness and static? No, Jake, it's not stress. It's real, the shadows, they're moving on their own. I saw them, Jake, they're not shadows, they're things listening. Waiting, Eagle Peak, I hear them whispering, my name. They know my name, Jake. How do they know my name? Her voice was dissolving into hysteria. Raven's Nest, Eagle Peak. Anna, stay calm. Am contacting dispatch, we're getting help to you. Just stay put, Anna. Stay safe, do you copy, Anna? Silence. Nothing but the hiss of static. I keyed the mic again and again. But Raven's Nest was gone. Swallowed by the wilderness, by the static, by something else. Dispatch, Eagle Peak, priority. We have a ranger down at Raven's Nest. Ranger Reed, possible psychological distress. Transmissions indicate visual and auditory hallucinations. Request immediate wellness check. Priority 1, dispatch. This is not a drill. My voice was tight, clipped, all professional calm now, hiding the cold dread that was creeping into my bones. Eagle Peak, dispatch. Chef of that Eagle Peak. Initiating wellness check protocol for Raven's Nest Tower. Search and rescue team dispatched. ETA approximately 4 hours, Eagle Peak. Advise you remain on station and monitor radio frequencies for further transmissions. Dispatch out, 4 hours. 4 hours for a search and rescue team to reach Raven's Nest Tower. 4 hours for Anna Reed to be alone in the wilderness with whatever was happening up there. 4 hours for the shadows to lengthen, for the whispers to grow louder, for the waiting things to close in. I stayed glued to the radio for the next 4 hours, scanning every frequency, hoping for a sign, a sound, anything from Raven's Nest. Nothing but static, just the endless hiss and crackle of empty airwaves, punctuated by the rhythmic drumming of my own heart against my ribs. The sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turning from blue to gray, then to an oppressive, starless black. The wind picked up, howling around Eagle Peak Tower, rattling the metal frame, mimicking laughter. High, thin, chilling laughter carried on the wind. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the wind, then through the static a faint signal, barely audible, weaker than anything I'd heard from Raven's Nest before. But it was there. A voice, Anna's voice. Eagle Peak, Jake, help faint. Distorted, almost swallowed by static. Raven's Nest, Eagle Peak. Anna, is that you? Anna, do you copy? What's your status? Where are you? I leaned into the mic, my voice urgent, desperate, more static. Then her voice again, closer this time, clearer but different. Wrong. Jake, they're here with me in the tower, Jake, Anna. Who's there? What do you see? Anna, respond. What's happening at Raven's Nest? My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the mic steady. A long pause, just static again. Then a sound that made my blood run cold. It's not Anna's voice this time. Something else. Something inhuman. A low guttural growl laced with something playful. Malicious. Anna is ours now? The voice was deep, resonant, echoing with a power that shouldn't have been possible over a radio transmission. It sounded like it was speaking from right beside me, inside my own head. Then Anna's voice again, a scream high and piercing, cut short by static. Just static. Endless, empty static. Raven's Nest Tower silent, Anna Reed gone. I tried to call Raven's Nest Tower again and again, every frequency, every channel. Nothing, just static. I used my satellite phone. Ranger headquarters reported Anna's last transmission. The scream, the voice, the thing. They promised the search and rescue team was on its way. They promised they'd find her. They always promise. The search and rescue team arrived at Raven's Nest Tower just before dawn. I listened to their radio chatter, static-filled, disjointed. They found the tower deserted. Anna's gear was still inside. Her sleeping bag, her field guides, her logbook missing. No sign of a struggle, no sign of Anna Reed. Just emptiness. The official report when it came was brief, clinical. Ranger Reed's disappearance attributed to voluntary levitating. Possibly a mental breakdown due to isolation and stress. No evidence of foul play. No unusual findings. Case closed. Another unsolved Ranger disappearance filed away, forgotten. Another secret swallowed by the mountains. But I knew better. I had Anna's transmissions recorded, replayed them countless times. Searching for answers in the static, in the silences, in the spaces between her words. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls around Eagle Peak Tower, when the static on the radio is just right, I think I hear something else beneath the hiss and crackle. Faint whispers, and that chilling laughter, carried on the wind. From Raven's Nest Tower, from the shadows of the forest, from something that waits and listens, and knows your name. I put in for a transfer, requesting a post down south, flatlands, no mountains, no forests. Dispatch approved it, no questions asked. They know they all know, in their own way. Some things in the wilderness are beyond rescue, beyond understanding. Some things listen from the shadows, and some transmissions are best left unanswered. But the mountains never forget, and neither will I. Raven's Nest Tower, silent. Anna Reed, gone. And the whispers remain. Do you ever get that feeling? Standing at the edge of something, a cliff, a dark room, a decision, that there's just nothing beneath you? It's not in a literal sense, but like the solid ground you thought was there is actually just a thin shell. And under that shell, there's something else. Something you really don't want to fall into. That's Shadow Creek Experimental Forest in a nutshell. My name's Ethan Bellamy, early 20s forestry student. Ambitious, maybe a little too much for my own good. Professor Armstrong, my supervisor. He'd called it academic zeal. My mom called it a death wish disguised as curiosity. Either way, it landed me smack dab in the middle of Shadow Creek for my solo research project. Soil composition, tree root systems, real cutting-edge stuff. At least in the world of forestry undergrads. Shadow Creek's experimental for a reason. Plus theologically wonky. Always shifting and settling like the earth itself is breathing. Professor Armstrong, he'd practically vibrated with excitement when he handed me the assignment. Bellamy, he'd said, his eyes gleaming behind those thick glasses. Shadow Creek, it's pregnant with data. Pregnant, charming, right? He'd chosen a remote sector way off the marked trails, an area flagged on the geological survey maps as unstable. Figures he'd do for the unstable part. Wanted to impress Armstrong, sure, but there was more to it than that. I wanted to find something significant. Some anomaly in the soil samples, some unheard-of root system, something to make my name mean something in this field. Ego, maybe. Or just the desperate need to feel like I was actually contributing something real, something tangible, to a world that felt increasingly flimsy. My research camp was basic. On-a-man tent, portable generator for the sensors and cameras I'd be using. Enough free-street meals to last a week. The isolation was the point. No distractions, just the data, the trees and me. The forest pressed in close, ancient pines and hemlocks, their needles carpeting the ground in a thick, silent layer. Shadow Creek lived up to its name even in midday. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. The first few days were routine. Wake up before dawn, hike to my designated research plots, collect soil samples, set up sensors, download data, hike back to camp as dusk fell, eat, sleep, repeat. The data was interesting. Soil composition was definitely unusual. Higher concentrations of certain minerals than expected. Some trace elements I couldn't even identify. Tree root systems were aggressive, spreading further deeper than any textbook had prepared me for. But nothing groundbreaking, nothing to make Armstrong's eyes gleam any brighter. Then I found the sinkhole. It wasn't marked on any maps. Definitely not on mine, not even on the older geological surveys Armstrong had given me as background. I stumbled across it on day 4, while tracking a particularly stubborn set of sensor readings. Pushing through a thicket of ferns, I nearly walked right into it. It was wrong. Unnaturally circular, like someone had taken a giant cookie cutter to the forest floor. Deep, too. I couldn't see the bottom, just a dark, gaping maw in the earth, swallowing the already meager sunlight. The air around it felt colder, a noticeable drop in temperature as I approached the edge. And the smell, that's what really got to me. Earthy, yes, undeniably organic, but unsettlingly so. Like turned soil, but older. Richer, almost putrid. It was a smell that burrowed into your nose, lingered at the back of your throat, a smell that whispered of decay, but also disturbingly of something vital. Life and death tangled together in a way that made my stomach churn. My academic curiosity, that zeal Armstrong was so fond of, kicked in hard. This was something significant. This wasn't in any textbook. I set up my tripod at the edge of the sinkhole, carefully positioning my camera and sensors. I wanted to get a visual, spectral analysis of the interior, maybe even drop a microphone to record any ambient sounds. Rational, scientific investigation. That's what I told myself anyway. But as I adjusted the equipment, that primal unease started to creep in again. The camera feed flickered, distorted. Static lines crawled across the screen, obscuring the image. The spectral analyzer spat out error messages, readings spiking and plummeting erratically. The microphone just static. White noise, pulsing in time with that low, almost subsonic thrumming ID noticed the first night. Only louder now, emanating directly from the sinkhole. Equipment malfunction. Common enough in fieldwork, especially with cheap student-grade gear, but both units failing simultaneously. And that static, that pulsing, it felt deliberate. Frustration warred with that growing unease. I tried again, recalibrating, rebooting, even swapping out the power source. Same result, corrupted data, flickering images, that relentless pulsing static. It was like the sinkhole itself was resisting. As I was packing up the malfunctioning equipment, something glinted in the fading light, half buried in the leaf litter around the sinkhole's perimeter. Metal fragments, older research equipment, not mine, not student grade, professional high-end stuff, twisted, broken, scattered like debris from an explosion or something struggling to get free. Someone else had been here. Someone else had investigated this sinkhole, and something had gone wrong. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist around the sinkhole's edge. The earthy smell intensified, thick and cloying. The pulsing thrumming grew louder, vibrating through the soles of my boots, resonating in my chest. It was time to go back to camp. Rational decision. Darkness was falling, and I was miles off trail. But as I turned to leave, my gaze fell on something else. Nestled beneath a gnarled root near the sinkhole's edge. Waterproof container, industrial grade. The kind used to store sensitive equipment in harsh environments. Hidden, deliberately concealed. Curiosity, that damn academic zeal, won again. I knelt, pulled the container free from the root's embrace. Heavy, sealed tight and damp. Not from rain, from something internal. I wrestled the lid open. Inside, nestled in foam padding, a field journal. Leather-bound, worn, water-damaged. Professor Armstrong's field journal, my supervisor. Here, before me, investigating this sinkhole. It didn't make sense. Armstrong was a lab man, a theorist, not a field researcher. But the journal was real, and as I flipped through the water-stained pages, my unease solidified into something cold, something primal, fear. The first entries were clinical. Armstrong's familiar, meticulous handwriting detailing his arrival at Shadow Creek, his research objectives, his initial soil samples and geological readings. Perfectly normal, almost boring. But as I read further, the tone shifted. Subtly at first, then dramatically. The handwriting became rushed, erratic. The clinical observations gave way to something else, something obsessive. Day 7 soil samples anomalous. Organic content unidentifiable. Geological readings fluctuating wildly. Sinkhole expanding, perimeter measurements inconsistent. Day 12 tremors, subtle, almost imperceptible. Equipment sensitive, readings interference, or something else. Earthy smell intensifying. Unsettling. Day 18, journal entries fragmented. Focus difficult. Sinkhole pull. Compulsion. Mud understand soil samples alive? Microscopic analysis structures unknown. Day 25, the hum constant now. Vibrations palpable, equipment useless. Readings meaningless. Must descend, must see something awakening. Day 32, cabin failing. Walls groaning. Floorboard shifting. It restless, it hears us, it smells us. The last entry, scrawled almost illegible. Just those 5 words. It hears us, it smells us. The ground beneath me began to tremble, not subtly this time. Visibly, the trees around me swayed, their needles rustling like dry whispers. The earthy smell from the journal pages, from the sinkhole itself, became overpowering, choking, like breathing in turned earth and something else. Something ancient, something subterranean. From the sinkhole, from the dark gaping maw in the earth, a sound low, guttural, a growl, not animal, not human. Something in between, followed by the sound of shifting earth. Deep, massive, the sound of something rising. Terror, pure, unadulterated terror. It hit me like a physical force, paralyzing, gut-wrenching. Armstrong's journal slipped from my numb fingers, falling to the leaf-strewn ground. His warnings real. His fear justified. Something was awakening. Something beneath the forest floor, and it heard us. It smelled us. Its rational thought evaporated. Scientific curiosity, academic zeal, all gone, replaced by a single primal imperative run. I didn't think, didn't plan, didn't even look back. I just ran, blindly, desperately. Crashing through the underbrush, stumbling over roots and fallen logs. Driven by pure, unreasoning panic. The ground trembled behind me, the growling sound echoing through the trees, growing louder, closer. The earthy smell impossibly seemed to follow me, clinging to my clothes, filling my nostrils. A constant sickening reminder of what was pursuing me. Branches whipped at my face. Thorns tore at my clothes. The forest seemed to actively resist my flight, tripping me, slowing me, trying to hold me back. But I kept running, fueled by adrenaline and terror, my lungs burning. My heart hammering against my ribs, every muscle screaming in protest. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. Just away. Away from the sinkhole, away from the cabin, away from that smell, that sound, that thing. Time lost all meaning. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together into a desperate, frantic flight. I fell, stumbled, picked myself up, kept running. The growling persisted. A constant, relentless presence in the darkness behind me, a promise of something inevitable, something inescapable. Then through the trees a flicker of light, faint, distant, but real. Hope, a fragile, desperate tendril unfurled in my chest. A trail, a ranger trail, marked, maintained, leading somewhere. Civilization, safety. I stumbled onto the trail, my legs heavy, my breath ragged, but I kept moving, putting one foot in front of the other, driven by that faint, distant light. The growling behind me seemed to fade, replaced by the rustling of leaves, the sighing of wind in the trees, normal forest sounds. Almost normal. Still tainted by the memory of that unearthly growl, that suffocating smell. The trail widened, became more defined. The light grew brighter, resolving into the warm glow of windows, the comforting hum of electricity. Ranger station, salvation. I burst from the trees, stumbling into the parking lot, collapsing onto the cold asphalt, gasping for breath. My body trembling uncontrollably. The ranger station, a small log cabin structure, loomed before me. a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. Lights flickered on inside as I stumbled toward the entrance, pushing open the heavy wooden door, collapsing onto the floor inside. The warmth, the light, the human presence. It was overwhelming, almost unbearable after the cold, the dark, the thing in the woods. A ranger, young, maybe my age, rushed toward me, his face etched with concern. "Sir, are you all right?" "What happened?" I tried to speak, but my voice was just a croak. "Sinkhole Forrest," something. He helped me to my feet, guided me to a chair, pressed a mug of hot coffee into my shaking hands. "Take it easy, sir. Just breathe. Tell me what happened." Slowly, haltingly, I told him about the research project, the sinkhole, the equipment malfunction, the fragments of older equipment, and finally Armstrong's journal. I pulled the water-stained journal from my pocket, handing it to him, my fingers still trembling. He read it, his brow furrowing, his expression shifting from concern to something else. Disbelief, skepticism, or something darker. "Professor Armstrong," he asked, his voice flat, "you said this is his journal?" I nodded, numb, exhausted, still smelling that earthy, sickening smell in my nostrils. "Yes, he was here before me. He knew, he warned me." The ranger called in my story, his voice clipped, professional, relaying the details to someone higher up the chain. Minutes stretched into an eternity as we waited. Then the response: geological survey team dispatched. Area to be assessed. "Thank you for your report, sir. Please remain at the station." They arrived the next morning, a team of serious-faced men and women in hard hats and field gear. I led them back into the forest, retracing my steps, my heart sinking with every mile. We reached the area where ID found the sinkhole. Nothing, just trees, undisturbed forest floor, carpeted in pine needles and ferns. No sinkhole, no clearing, no cabin, no trace of my camp or Armstrong's or anything unnatural. The geological survey team conducted their assessment. Seismic readings, soil samples, radar scans. Hours passed, then the verdict. Area deemed geologically stable. No sinkhole detected. No unusual geological activity, hallucinations. Stress. Exposure, that's what they implied. That's what the official report concluded. Ethan Bellamy, forestry student, experienced a psychological event. No evidence of anything else. Back at the ranger station, they handed me Armstrong's journal back. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Bellamy. I'll keep this on file." The ranger's eyes avoided mine. Dismissal, ostracization. That's what I felt from them, from the academic community, from everyone I tried to tell. But I have the journal. Water-stained, worn, filled with Armstrong's frantic handwriting, his growing fear. His final chilling warning: it hears us. It smells us. And sometimes, late at night, when the earth is still and the silence is deep, I swear I can still smell it. That earthy, unsettling smell, and I can almost hear it. That low, guttural growl from beneath the forest floor. Waiting, awakened, and hungry. It's the stillness that gets to you after all these years. Not the dark, not the cold, not even the isolation itself. Though Sawtooth Ridge offers all three in spades. It's the unnatural quiet. You'd think after 20 years as a park ranger, it'd be immune to the silence of the deep woods. But there's silence, and then there's this. This evening, as I drove the last few miles to the outpost, the usual symphony of the forest, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the distant chatter of squirrels, the evening chorus of birds, it was just muted. Like someone had thrown a thick blanket over the world. I'm Elias Thorne, 48 years old, give or take, and I've been a ranger in this national park for longer than most of these city-sucking tourists have been alive. Sawtooth Ridge is my domain. It's remote, even by park standards. Shut forest that swallows sound, canyons that drop away into shadow, and trails that are more suggestion than path. Most rangers rotate through different sectors, thank God. But I've always requested Sawtooth. Folks call me a hermit, maybe they're right, but I find peace here, a kind of solace you can't get anywhere else. Solitude doesn't scare me, hell, I prefer it. Keeps the ghost quiet, mostly. Tonight, though, even for Sawtooth, it's different. I pulled up to the outpost, A single-room cabin, more glorified shed than anything else but its shelter, and killed the engine. The silence rushed in to fill the void. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the density of it, like the air itself had thickened, muffling everything. I sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, just listening, or rather not listening. Nothing. No crickets, no owls, not even the whisper of wind in the pines that always seemed to be present, even on the stillest nights. Just nothing. I chalked it up to the weather. High-pressure system moving in, maybe sometimes those things can deaden sound. Pragmatism, that's what keeps a ranger alive out here. Logic and routine. I went through my evening checklist, methodical, practiced. Equipment check, radio test, perimeter scan. Everything normal outwardly. But that stillness, it was like a pebble in my boot. A constant nagging discomfort. Inside the outpost, the silence followed me. The usual creaks and groans of the old cabin were absent. Even the static hum of the radio felt less. I flipped it on, standard dispatch check-in time. Dispatch, this is Thorn, Outpost 7. Evening check-in over. Static, just a hiss of white noise, unusually thick, like the air itself was interfering with the signal. I adjusted the squelch, fiddled with the frequency. Nothing. Dispatch, Thorn, Outpost 7, radio check, do you read? Over, more static. Frustration prickled at me. Radio interference wasn't unheard of in the canyons, but this was total. Complete blackout. I cycled through frequencies again, even tried the emergency channels. Dead air. Just that thick, pulsing static, like the radio itself was struggling to breathe. Damn it, I muttered, slamming a fist on the console, more out of irritation than real concern. Pragmatism again. Radios fail, batteries die. It happens. I had a backup, a satellite phone for emergencies. No need to panic, not yet. I decided to start my patrol early. Get moving, get warm. Maybe the exercise would shake off this unease. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my sidearm routine, always routine, and stepped back out into the twilight. The forest swallowed me whole. The silence was even more oppressive outside. It pressed in on me, a physical weight. My boots crunched on the pine needle path, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. I started my usual circuit, checking the perimeter trails, scanning for anything out of place. Deer droppings, squirrel tracks, the faint imprint of a raccoon's paw on the soft earth. It's normal forest life? Except where were the animals themselves? No rustling in the underbrush, no birds calling from the trees. Just silence. Then I found them, the carcasses, not one but three, in quick succession. A deer, a fox, and something smaller, maybe a rabbit. All lying just off the trail, almost posed. At first glance, they looked untouched, pristine, but something drew me closer. The deer was first. Magnificent buck, or had been. Now limp, lifeless, I knelt down, flashlight beam steady. No sign of struggle, no obvious wounds. Just stillness. Too much stillness. I touched its fur, expecting the coarse texture, the warmth of recent death. It was cold, ice cold. Like it had been refrigerated and lighter than it should be. I ran my gloved hand along its flank, feeling the ribcage beneath. Hollow, emptier than it should be. Then I saw it, the small puncture wound on its neck, almost invisible beneath the thick fur. Tiny, precise, like a needle prick, the fox and the rabbit were the same. Perfectly preserved, unnaturally cold and drained. Drained of blood. Not scavenged, not ripped apart by predators. Drained. I had seen animal attacks before. Bears, mountain lions, coyotes. Messy, brutal. This was surgical. Clean. Impossible. My radio crackled to life, startling me. Static again, but different this time. Faint, pulsing, almost rhythmic, overlaid on the white noise. Dispatch? I tried again, my voice tighter now. Thorn, Outpost 7. Do you read? Over. The static pulsed, a low throbbing beat, like a heartbeat or something mimicking one. Then through the static, a sound. Faint, barely audible, but words? Whispers. Too distorted to understand, but human voices, or something trying to sound human. Dispatch, is that you? My voice was barely a whisper now. The whispers intensified, swirling around the static, growing louder, closer. They seemed to be coming from the radio itself, filling the small cabin with a chorus of unintelligible voices. Panic tightened its grip. This wasn't radio interference. This was something else, something wrong. I slammed the radio off, cutting the whispers abruptly. The silence rushed back in, heavier than ever. Back outside, the woods seemed to press closer. The shadows deepened, twisting into shapes that weren't quite right. My flashlight beam felt weak, barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. The silence, it was getting to me. I started hearing things, faint rustling just beyond the firelight, whispers that seemed to carry on the non-existent wind, auditory hallucinations. Stress, exhaustion, isolation. My mind playing tricks. That's what I told myself. Pragmatism, but the tracks, those weren't hallucinations. I found them near the stream, mud soft enough to hold an imprint. Too large for a deer, too narrow for a bear. And wrong, somehow fundamentally wrong. They weren't paw prints, or hooves, or human feet. They were elongated, almost skeletal, with what looked like claws. But no claws I'd ever seen. Too many toes, too sharp, too precise. Like instruments. I followed them for a short distance, my heart pounding in my chest, until they disappeared into the dry underbrush, leaving no trace. I didn't push it. Some instincts are stronger than pragmatism. Some silences are too loud to ignore. But at the outpost, the radio was completely dead. Not even static now, just nothing. I tried the satellite phone. No signal, no signal. No signal, no signal, the screen mocked, bright green letters against the encroaching darkness. Isolation, complete and utter, cut off. And that silence, it was like a living thing now, breathing down my neck, waiting. I built up the fire, feeding it every piece of wood I could find, the flames a flickering defiance against the encroaching dark. The fire crackled, popped, spat sparks into the night sky, the only sound in the world. For a while. Then the silence broke. Not gradually, not fading in, but erupting. A sound that ripped through the stillness like a knife through silk. A whine. Piercing, high-pitched, impossibly loud, it clawed at my eardrums, vibrated in my teeth, resonated in my bones. It wasn't just loud, it was focused, directed. Like a sonic weapon aimed directly at my skull. Pain lanced through my head, sharp and blinding. Deorientation washed over me, nausea rising in my throat. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it was no use. The whine was inside my head now. A screaming presence that drowned out everything else. Then, through the pain, a cold, terrifying clarity. The silence, it hadn't been natural. It hadn't been weather-related. It had been deliberate. A hunting tactic a vacuum created to amplify something else. The whine was the hunter's call. The whine was the hunt. Movement, peripheral vision, beyond the firelight at the edge of the clearing. Tall, slender shapes gliding between the trees. Too tall, too slender, moving with a fluidity that defied gravity, defied nature. Distorted by the unnatural silence, their forms seemed to bend and twist, elongated limbs and impossibly narrow torsos. They were there. In the silence, drawn by the whine, drawn to me, run, instinct raw and primal. No plan, no strategy, just run. I scrambled back, away from the fire, away from the clearing, stumbling blindly toward the outpost. The whine intensified, growing louder, closer. A sonic wave pushing me forward, driving me toward the cabin, toward shelter, or a trap. Didn't matter, run. The figures were closing. I could sense them now, not just see them. A presence in the silence, a void in the soundscape, moving soundlessly, impossibly fast, gliding, not running, flowing through the underbrush, through the trees like smoke. Or shadows, or something else, something that hunted in the absence of sound. I reached the outpost, fumbling for the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Inside, darkness cold and that whine, echoing around me, bouncing off the thin wooden walls. Barricade, instinct again. Chair, table, anything heavy. Block the door. Block the windows, block them. Furniture scraped across the wooden floor, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. Punctuated by the constant piercing whine. I pushed, shoved, wedged, barricading the door, the windows, anything, everything. creating a fragile barrier between me and them. Inside the outpost, darkness and the wine and the presence felt more than seen, more than heard, pressing against the walls, testing the barricades, a weight of something other just outside. The wine pulsed, intensified, then faded. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the piercing scream subsided, leaving behind a ringing silence that was almost as painful. The figures, were they still there? Outside, waiting, listening, hunting. Dawn, a pale gray light filtering through the barricaded windows, the wine gone. Silence again, but different. Not oppressive now, not predatory. Just quiet, tentative sounds returning. A bird chirping hesitantly, then another, then a chorus, slowly building, reclaiming the forest soundscape. Exhaustion, terror, relief, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. I pushed aside the barricades, slowly, cautiously, peering out into the dawn-lit clearing. Empty, the figures gone, the fire pit. Cold gray ash scattered by the wind. The forest, normal almost, radio weak signal, flickering in and out but functional. Strappen, this is Thorn. Outpost 7, emergency transmission. Do you read? Over. Static, then a voice. Faint crackling but human. Outpost 7, this is dispatch. Read you weak, Thorn. Report status. Over. Unusual wildlife activity, I managed. My voice hoarse, barely a whisper. Requesting immediate extraction. Repeat, immediate extraction. Over. Copy. Outpost 7, extraction team en route. ETA 2 hours. Hold tight, Thorn. Over. 2 hours. An eternity, but help was coming. I was leaving Sawtooth Ridge behind. Leaving the silence, the wine, the figures, the hunt. The wine was gone, but the silence. The silence would stay with me always. Dead at headquarters, the lights were too bright, the sounds too loud, the human voices overwhelming. I filed a report. Vague, sanitized, omitting the impossible, the supernatural. Unusual wildlife activity, I wrote. Possible pack of aggressive coyotes. Shrekking investigation of area. They nodded, took my report, filed it away. No one questioned, no one probed. Just routine, pragmatism again. But in my mind, in the silence that still echoes there, I see them. Those tall, slender figures, gliding through the trees, hunting in the vacuum of sound. And I hear it, the whine, the hunter's call. And I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that some horrors hunt not with sound but in its terrifying absence. And that silence, it's still out there, waiting. The compass spun like a frantic beetle trapped under glass, its needle a blur of useless motion. That was the first lie the forest told me, though I didn't recognize it as such then. Merely an anomaly, a cartographer's annoyance. Arthur Davies and maps are my language, precision my religion. I chart the world, I define spaces, I bring order to the chaos of terrain. Or so I believed until Whisper Creek. It started with an error, a ghost in the machine of official documentation, an outdated geological survey from the 1930s, unearthed during a routine digital archive sweep at the Forestry Department. Whisper Creek, it declared, snaked its way through a valley that, according to every contemporary map, was nothing but unbroken ridge line. A cartographer's itch, that's what it was. A need to reconcile discrepancy, to chase down the phantom creek and either correct the old map or expose the new ones as incomplete. Whisper Creek. Even the name had a certain lure, a promise of hidden secrets, of places untouched by the blunt hand of progress. I packed light solo hikes were my meditation, my escape from the grid lines and data points of my desk job. Just my compass, GPS, topographical maps, modern naturally, and the ingrained spatial logic that had always been my guiding star. The trailhead was barely marked, a faded signpost swallowed by encroaching undergrowth. Good, I thought. The less trodden, the better. The early miles were unremarkable. The familiar rhythm of the forest, pine needles underfoot, the rustle of unseen creatures, the filtered sunlight painting shifting patterns on the path. My GPS locked onto a signal, the compass needle, for now held steady. Logic reigned. Then the subtle shifts began. A slight disorientation at first, a feeling of walking further than my pace suggested, of landmarks appearing where they shouldn't. My GPS flickered, the displayed coordinates jittering erratically before settling, momentarily on my supposed location. I recalibrated my compass, double-checking against the sun's position, the familiar curve of the ridgeline. Everything seemed off. I reached Whisper Creek. Or rather, I reached a creek, flowing through a narrow ravine, water gurgling over stones. But it wasn't there, not where the old map, the errant survey, had placed it. It was displaced, shifted east by perhaps half a mile, maybe more. A cartographer's error, I told myself. A simple miscalculation in a bygone era of less precise instruments. Annoying, but understandable. It was the landscape around the creek that truly began to unsettle me. Subtle at first, almost subliminal. Trees that seemed to lean at angles that defied gravity, their trunks twisting in spirals that weren't quite natural. Like Escher's sketches rendered in bark and leaves. Rock formations that shifted in perspective as I moved, their jagged outlines never quite resolving into a coherent shape. And the creek itself. Whisper Creek lived up to its name, the water murmuring with an unnaturally low, resonant tone, as if carrying secrets from the earth's depths. And it flowed wrong. Uphill in sections, defying the fundamental laws of gravity. The water shimmering as it climbed, as if pulled by some unseen force. I pulled out my sketch pad, my cartographer's instinct kicking in. I would map this anomaly, chart its deviations, bring order to its apparent chaos. I began to sketch the creek's unnatural course, the distorted angles of the trees, the shifting rock formations. But my pencil seemed to resist my will. The lines blurring, the angles distorting on the page, mirroring the landscape itself. My meticulous sketches became jagged, nonsensical mockeries of spatial representation. Then the voice, a whisper on the wind so faint I almost dismissed it as my imagination. But it carried words, indistinct, sibilant, seemingly mocking my efforts. I looked around expecting to see another hiker, a park ranger perhaps, but I was alone. The whisper returned, closer now, seemingly echoing from the creek itself, a disembodied voice that seemed to know my thoughts, my growing frustration, my rising unease. Lost, cartographer? It seemed to murmur, the sound weaving through the rustling leaves. Logic fails here. Precision is meaningless, the anomalies multiplied. Paths that should have led away from the creek looped back on themselves, depositing me again and again at the water's edge. Distances stretched and compressed. A landmark I thought was a mile away would suddenly loom before me, then recede into the fog. Time itself seemed to fluctuate. Moments stretched into eternities of disorientation, then compressed into blinks of lost direction. I stumbled upon fragments of other maps, torn and discarded, scattered like fallen leaves. Not my maps, not Forest Service maps. Hand-drawn things, crude sketches on scraps of parchment, with frantic notes scribbled in margins, ink bleeding into the rough paper. No escape, one read. The map is a lie, another declared. It changes. The last one sent a shiver down my spine. It knows when you try to chart it. Panic began to gnaw at the edges of my composure. My compass was useless, GPS dead, maps nonsensical. The forest, Whisper Creek. This entire place was actively resisting my attempts to understand it, to map it, to confine it within the rigid lines of cartography. Logic, precision, the tools of my trade were failing me utterly. Desperation clawed at me. I had to get out. I had to escape Whisper Creek. I oriented myself, or what I thought was oriented. Using the sun, the faint memory of the direction I'd come from. A direct route. That's what I needed, a straight line back to the trailhead. I started walking, then hiking, then almost running, pushing through the distorted landscape, ignoring the whispering voice that now seemed to follow me, to breathe down my neck with every step. But the landscape shifted again, subtly, insidiously. The familiar ridgeline I'd used as a landmark twisted. The trees rearranged themselves. The path beneath my feet seemed to curve and bend against my will. And then I saw it. The creek, Whisper Creek, gurgling, murmuring, flowing uphill. I was back at the water's edge, trapped in this impossible valley. no matter which direction I walked, no matter how far I pushed. The voice became louder, more distinct, no longer a whisper on the wind, but a presence in my mind, taunting me directly. Lost cartographer? Maps are useless here. This place answers to a different geometry. A cold, horrifying realization washed over me. Whisper Creek wasn't a fixed location, not a cartographic error. It was the error itself, the anomaly made flesh. A shifting fold in space, a place that defied mapping because it was the unmappable, and I was trapped within its distorted reality. Rage, then a furious, futile defiance. I ripped my maps to shreds, threw my useless compass and dead GPS into the creek. Logic had betrayed me. Cartography had failed. Reason was meaningless here. I would trust instinct now, a primal, irrational urge to escape. I turned, not toward the trailhead, not toward logic, but toward the creek itself. Uphill. I would follow the impossible flow of Whisper Creek, trusting that this twisted logic, this defiance of natural law, might somehow lead me out. The landscape resisted, as if angered by my rejection of its distorted rules. The creek twisted into impossible spirals, the water churning and frothing as it climbed, the ground crumbling beneath my feet, threatening to swallow me whole. Trees seemed to lean in, branches snagging at my clothes, deliberately blocking my path. But I pushed on, fueled by a desperate animalistic will to survive. I scrambled over shifting rocks, waded through the unnaturally cold water, clawed my way through thorny undergrowth, the voice now a constant, mocking presence in my head. A chorus of whispers urging me to give up, to accept my fate, to become another discarded map fragment in the cartographer's error. Then a break. A flicker of something familiar in the distorted terrain. A tree that didn't lean at quite such an impossible angle. A rock formation that almost resembled something I'd seen before. Hope, fragile and tentative, sparked within me. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain in my lungs, the exhaustion in my limbs, the voice that whispered insidious doubts in my ear. And then, suddenly, I stumbled. Not on a root or a rock, but on something solid, something real. A trail marker. Faded, weathered, but undeniably there, a rectangle of Forest Service brown, nailed to a tree that stood straight and true, its branches reaching for a sky that felt impossibly normal again. I collapsed, breath heaving, muscles trembling, disoriented, but free. I was out of Whisper Creek's influence, back in a reality that obeyed the laws of physics, a world that could be mapped, charted, understood. I checked my equipment more out of habit than hope. My maps were blank, pristine white paper, as if they'd never been marked. My compass spun uncontrollably, its needle a frantic dance of chaos. My GPS was dead, its screen a lifeless void. I walked out of the forest, miles from where ID started, but finally, blessedly, free. I returned to civilization, to the ordered grid of streets and buildings, to the predictable logic of my profession. But something had broken within me at Whisper Creek. Cartography, once my religion, now felt like a futile exercise. A childish attempt to impose order on a universe that was fundamentally chaotic, fundamentally unmappable. I abandoned my maps, my compass, my GPS. I left the forestry department, unable to face the clean lines and precise angles of cartographic projections. I became a landscape painter, drawn to the chaotic beauty of the natural world, the places that defied human measurement, the spaces that whispered of something beyond our understanding. Whisper Creek, I never went back. And I understand now, with a bone-deep certainty, that some places are intentionally unmapped. Not errors, but warnings. Places where logic fails, where reality bends and breaks. Places designed to be lost. And some secrets, like the whispers of that impossible creek, are best left undisturbed, echoing in the unchartable darkness. The air tasted like ash and regret, a familiar flavor these days. Another wildfire, they said. Just dry lightning? Just another accident of nature in a season that felt determined to burn the world down. They said a lot of things. They being dispatch, the radio voices that were my only link to a world that suddenly felt very far away. My name's Dan Hayes, and I'm a fire lookout, 52 years old. give or take a few hard winters, and for the last 10 I've been perched on Hemlock Peak, watching the world from a steel and glass cage, 80 feet above the forest floor. Sounds romantic, doesn't it? Solitude, panoramic views, the noble task of protecting the wilderness. Bullshit. It's lonely, it's monotonous, and lately it's terrifying. I came to Hemlock Peak to escape, plain and simple. A messy divorce. A career that had stalled like a rusted engine. The slow, creeping realization that I was becoming a ghost in my own life. Up here, above the trees, above the noise, I thought I could find some silence, some space to breathe. What I found instead was a front row seat to something that made my past troubles seem as insignificant as dust motes. The wildfires started weeks ago. A slow burn at first, distant plumes of smoke on the horizon that dispatch assured us were under control. So then the wind shifted, the dry air crackled, and suddenly the whole damn state seemed to be ablaze. Hemlock Peak became ground zero, or rather sky zero. The air here is thick, acrid, a permanent haze that stings your eyes and coats your throat with grit. The sun is a pale, watery disk, barely visible through the smoke, and the days are draped in a perpetual twilight. Haze, Hemlock Peak, you copy? Dispatch voice crackled through the radio, breaking the oppressive silence of the tower. Taffa dispatch? I replied, my voice rough from disuse and smoke. Fire activity intensifying in Sector 4 and 7. Multiple new ignitions reported. Can you confirm? I scanned the quadrants dispatch indicated through my binoculars. Sector 4, the valley west of Hemlock, was already a roiling cauldron of orange and black, flames licking at the sky like hungry tongues. Sector 7, to the southeast, had been relatively clear just an hour ago. Now twin pillars of smoke were rising, joining the already suffocating haze. Affirmative dispatch. Sector 4 is critical. Sector 7 multiple new fires looks like. Too many for lightning strike dispatch, way too many. A pause, static hissing through the radio. We're seeing the same thing here, Hayes. Unusual fire patterns across the region. Arson suspected, possibly coordinated arson. That was the word they were using now, arson. As if some disgruntled teenager with a box of matches could conjure up this inferno. I looked out at the valleys below, valleys E.T. come to know intimately over these past years. Valleys now being devoured by flames, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't arson. This was something else. It was later that day, through the swirling smoke and haze, that I first saw them. Figures moving in the valleys below near the heart of the wildfires. At first I dismissed them as wildlife. Deer maybe panicked and fleeing the flames. But through my high-powered binoculars, I saw details that made my blood run cold. They were tall, impossibly tall, far taller than any deer, any bear. Gaunt, slender shapes that moved with an unnatural fluid grace. Their forms flickered in and out of visibility within the smoke plumes, like heat haze given substance. I strained my eyes, adjusting the focus, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Firefighters, maybe? But no, they weren't wearing gear, no protective suits, no helmets. They were just figures. Moving through the smoke towards the fires, not away. Dispatch Hemlock Peak, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I'm observing movement in Sector 4 near the fire lines. Possible personnel, but unusual behavior. Can you confirm any ground crews in that sector? Static. Then, dispatch's voice, laced with static and static. Negative, Hayes. No personnel authorized in Sector 4. Area is considered too volatile. Repeat, no personnel authorized in Sector 4. So what is the nature of the movement? Nature unclear, dispatch. Tall figures moving erratically. Towards the fire, not away. Appearing indistinct. Another pause. Dispatch voice sharpened, concern edging in. Indistinct, Hayes? Can you clarify? Are you experiencing visual distortion? Smoke inhalation? Negative, dispatch. Visuals are clear, but the figures themselves, they're hard to define. Like smoke given shape. Silence again, longer this time. I could feel the skepticism radiating through the radio waves, even through the static. Hayes, maintain observation. Document any further activity. But do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. This may be related to the suspected arson activity. Stay vigilant, Hayes. Vigilant, easy for them to say. Safe in their air-conditioned office, miles away. Up here in this tower, surrounded by a forest that was burning itself alive, vigilance was all I had left. As the days blurred into a smoke-filled eternity, the figures became a constant presence in my observations. They were always there in the valleys near the fires, moving with that unsettling grace. I started to hear things too. Sounds carried on the wind, faint at first, then growing clearer, more insistent. Chanting. A low, rhythmic droning that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Drumming, a deep primal beat that echoed through the valleys, mingling with the crackle and roar of the wildfires. And howls. Not animal howls, not coyote or wolf. Inhuman howls filled with a raw, desolate sorrow that made my teeth ache. These sounds, the chanting, the drumming, the howls, they seemed to emanate from the heart of the wildfires, as if the fires themselves were singing or screaming. The smoke grew thicker, more acrid, the air heavy with a new smell now, beyond the burnt pine and ash. Metallic ozone, but sharper, colder, like the tang of blood on the wind. My sleep became fractured, haunted by nightmares. Vivid, fiery nightmares. Vivid, fiery nightmares. Vivid, fiery nightmares. I'd see the valleys below Hemlock Peak. Not as they were, but twisted, distorted. The trees replaced by skeletal figures that danced in the flames, their eyes burning like embers. I'd wake up in a cold sweat. The smell of smoke clinging to my clothes, the chanting and drumming still echoing in my ears, even when the forest outside was silent. My weather radio, usually a source of reliable forecasts and emergency broadcast, started picking up strange signals, fragmented voices, not official fire reports, but distorted, garbled transmissions, voices speaking in an unknown language, a guttural, chanting tongue interspersed with static and the relentless beat of drums. I tried to filter the broadcast, to find a clear signal, but it was always the same. A chaotic jumble of static and voices and drums, as if the radio waves themselves were being corrupted. And then I saw them more clearly. So the smoke shifted for a moment, the wind momentarily clearing a pocket of air in the valley below, and for a few precious seconds the figures were revealed, no longer indistinct shapes in the haze, but starkly, terrifyingly real. Skeletal, their limbs too long, their joints bending at unnatural angles. Their skin, if it could be called skin, was stretched taut over bone, translucent, almost, like parchment illuminated from within by the firelight. They moved with unnatural speed, fluidity, their forms flickering, shimmering in and out of visibility within the smoke plumes, as if they were somehow phasing in and out of our reality. And their eyes, even from this distance, through the smoke and haze, I could see their eyes, burning like embers, fixed, unblinking and focused on the fires. The wildfires converged, days of separate fires, burning in different valleys, now drawn together, coalescing into a massive unified inferno that engulfed the land below Hemlock Peak. The heat was intense even here in the tower, 80 feet above the flames. The smoke was suffocating, a choking black cloud that blotted out the sun and turned midday into deepest night. The chanting and drumming were deafening, no longer faint sounds carried on the wind, but a visceral, bone-jarring cacophony that seemed to vibrate the very air around the tower. I looked down at the valleys, no longer valleys, but a sea of fire, and then I understood. The figures. They weren't fleeing the fires, they were feeding them, worshipping them. The wildfires weren't natural disasters. They were something orchestrated, something ritualistic. The figures were no longer moving near the fire lines. They were moving in the fire lines, within the heart of the inferno. Their forms now clearly visible, skeletal, gaunt, wreathed in smoke and flames, moving with unnatural immunity to the heat. They were feeding the fire, yes, but more than that, they were part of the fire, extensions of the flames themselves, animated by some dark primal force, and they were moving towards Hemlock Peak, not fleeing, not worshipping from afar, ascending, climbing the slopes of Hemlock Peak, moving through the burning forest as if the flames were their natural habitat, as if the fire itself was their path. I saw them clearly now, no longer indistinct shapes, but terrifyingly real, skeletal, gaunt, their eyes burning like embers. their forms wreathed in smoke and fire. Their chanting grew louder as they climbed. The drumming more insistent, their presence palpable. A suffocating weight that pressed down on the tower. On me, I barricaded myself in the lookout tower. Bolted the steel door, secured the windows, drew the fire-resistant shutters. Foolish gestures, I knew, against something like this. But instinct, the primal need to survive, drove me to it. The fire raged around the tower now, licking at the steel supports, the heat radiating through the metal walls, turning the interior into a furnace. The figures were climbing the tower stairs. I could hear them now, the heavy, dragging footsteps, the rasping breath, the chanting growing louder with each step, their presence just outside the steel door, palpable, suffocating. I had one weapon left, the tower's emergency flare gun. Stand issue for signaling for help, for marking locations in the wilderness. Not meant for combat, not meant for this. But it was all I had. I grabbed the flare gun, loaded a flare, aimed it at the steel door, at the space where I knew they would break through, and fired. The flare exploded in a blinding burst of light and heat, illuminating the interior of the tower in a harsh crimson glow. And it worked. For a moment the chanting faltered, the drumming stuttered, the footsteps outside paused. As the bright burst of light, the sudden surge of heat, it repelled them. Momentarily I reloaded the flare gun, my hands shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't signaling for help. There was no help to signal for. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was something else. Something ancient, something malevolent. And I was alone, in this tower 80 feet above the burning world, with only a flare gun and a handful of flares to defend myself against whatever they were. I fired again and again, flares exploding in rapid succession, each burst of light and heat pushing back the darkness, repelling the figures, buying me precious moments of respite. But the flares wouldn't last forever, and the fire raged on, and the chanting and drumming grew louder, and the figures, they were still coming. Then dawn broke, not suddenly. Not dramatically, but slowly, grudgingly. The darkness receding, the smoke thinning, the inferno below beginning to subside. As the first rays of sunlight touched the tower, the chanting and drumming faded. The figures retreated, disappearing back into the smoke and ash, melting back into the shadows from whence they came, exhausted, traumatized. Trembling, I slumped against the steel wall of the tower, the flare gun falling from my numb fingers. When the sun was fully risen, when the smoke had cleared enough to see the ravaged landscape below, I finally reached for the radio. Shepik, Hemlock Peak. My voice cracked, barely a whisper. Extreme fire activity valleys converged, requesting immediate evacuation. Repeated immediate evacuation. Dispatch voice, blessedly clear and human, crackled back. Copy, Hemlock Peak. Scream fire activity confirmed. Evacuation helicopter en route, ETA approximately 1 hour. Hold tight, Hayes. Help is on the way. Help, they were sending help for a wildfire. Not for what I'd seen, not for what I knew was still out there, lurking in the smoke and ash. The helicopter arrived an hour later. A welcome roar in the silence that followed the chanting and drumming. I was airlifted from Hemlock Peak, leaving the lookout tower behind, engulfed in smoke. A lonely sentinel in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly, incomprehensibly alien. End civilization in the sterile, antiseptic world of hospitals and news reports. The wildfires were officially attributed to dry conditions and arson. They showed footage on TV, aerial shots of the ravaged forests, interviews with fire officials, warnings to residents. Arson, they said. Dry lightning, they said. Natural disaster. But I knew the truth. The fires weren't just arson. They were something far more ancient, far more malevolent. And I, Daniel Hayes, fire lookout of Hemlock Peak, had been given a front row seat, not to escape, not to solitude, but to a terrifying ritual, a glimpse behind the veil of our rational world, into a darkness that lay just beneath the surface, waiting for the next fire to be lit. The smell of smoke still lingers, in my clothes, in my hair, in my memories. The heat of the flames, the chanting and drumming, the burning eyes of the figures in the fire, they're all still there. A permanent imprint on my soul. And now whenever I see a wildfire reported on the news, whenever I smell smoke on the wind, I don't think of natural disasters anymore. I think of Hemlock Peak. I think of the figures in the fire, and I know with a chilling certainty that wildfires are not always just wildfires. Sometimes they are something far more sinister, sometimes they are invitations. The silence wasn't the empty kind, the silence of absence. It was a silence that pressed in on you, a silence pregnant with sound, a silence that felt like it was listening back. Blackwood Caverns. Just the name had a weight to it, a resonance that vibrated in the bones before you even set foot near the place. Locals whispered stories, of course. Every forgotten corner of the world has its share of folklore, its tales to keep children in line and outsiders at bay. Unexplained disappearances, strange lights flickering within the cave mouths, echoes that weren't your own. Liam, ever the reckless ringleader, ate it up. Chloe, more grounded, more attuned to the subtle currents of unease, tried to rationalize it, to strip away the myth and find the geological truth beneath. I was somewhere in between, thrill-seeker by nature, urban explorer by choice, but with enough sense to know when a place felt wrong. We were a trio. Liam and Chloe and I bound together by that peculiar addiction to the forbidden spaces of the world, the places marked no trespassing, the whispers on the fringes of maps. We'd climbed abandoned cranes in the dead of night, navigated forgotten subway tunnels, mapped the skeletal remains of industrial giants, places where the city had bled out and left behind ghosts of steel and concrete. Blackwood Caverns was different, though. It wasn't a scar of the modern world, but something older, something that predated us, that would outlast us. "Think of the photos, Ethan," Liam had said, his eyes alight with that familiar fever. "No one's been properly inside for years. Not since, well, you know." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew the stories, the hushed accounts of a group of amateur spelunkers vanishing without a trace. Back in the 70s, their gear recovered near the entrance, their bodies gone. Imagine what we could find. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, had countered, and imagine what could find us. "Ethan, you've read the local forums. People talk about more than just disappearances. They talk about sounds." ID shrugged it off, a practiced dismissal. "Echoes, Chloe? It's a cave, caves echo." But even as I said it, a sliver of doubt, a prickle of apprehension had settled in my gut. Blackwood Caverns wasn't just any cave, it was Blackwood. The name itself whispered of darkness, of secrets buried deep beneath the earth. The entrance was as unwelcoming as the legends suggested. A jagged maw on the hillside, swallowed by shadow, even in the mid-morning sun. Claustrophobic didn't even begin to cover it. We squeezed through a narrow fissure, scraping against cold, damp rock, the world outside abruptly vanishing behind us. Then the space opened up, unexpectedly, shockingly vast. Our flashlight beams, even the high-powered ones Liam insisted on, seemed swallowed by the sheer volume of the cavern. Failing to reach the far walls, the ceiling lost in an impenetrable blackness. The air was cold, a bonnet-deep chill that seeped through layers of clothing, and damp, clinging to our skin like a shroud. There was a smell, too, earthy and ancient, like turned soil, and something else. Something metallic, a faint tang that made the back of my throat tighten. Water dripped constantly, each drop echoing in the vast emptiness like a hammer blow. "Whoa," Liam breathed, his usual bravado momentarily muted by the scale of the place. "This is bigger than I thought." Chloe just shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Colder, too, and quieter than I expected. She was right. Despite the dripping water, the space was eerily silent. Our voices, when we spoke, seemed to be absorbed by the rock, the echoes weak and strangely muffled. We moved deeper, our flashlights carving hesitant paths through the absolute dark. The caverns were a labyrinth, a chaotic sprawl of tunnels branching off in every direction, levels rising and falling with no discernible pattern. It was easy to get disoriented, to lose all sense of direction in the oppressive blackness. Then we started to hear them. At first they were faint, almost subliminal. Whispers at the edge of hearing, indistinct murmurs that could have been the wind, the water, the blood rushing in your ears. "Did you hear that?" Chloe asked, stopping abruptly. her flashlight beam jittering nervously across the cave walls. Liam, ever the showman, laughed, a forced, hollow sound that vanished almost instantly in the cavernous space. Just the cave settling, Chloe. Relax. But they grew, those whispers, subtly at first, then with increasing clarity. They weren't just echoes of the dripping water, the settling rock. They were something else, something conscious. Do you think, Chloe began? Her voice barely audible above the drip, drip, drip of water. Do you think it's talking? I scoffed, though the sound felt thin and unconvincing even to my own ears. It's a cave, Chloe. Rocks don't talk. But the whispers continued, growing more distinct, more personal. They started mimicking sounds, snippets of our earlier conversations. Think of the photos, Ethan. A faint, distorted voice echoed from somewhere in the rock, mimicking Lime's earlier enthusiasm. No one's been properly inside for years. Then another softer, almost mournful sound, like Chloe's voice laced with a chilling distortion, whispered. Colder too, and quieter than I expected. It was twisting them, making them sound alien, malevolent. Okay, Liam said, his voice losing its forced bravado, a tremor creeping in. That's weird. We pressed on deeper into the labyrinth, the echoes intensifying, surrounding us, closing in. They shifted from mimicry to something more unsettling. Snippets of conversations we'd had weeks ago, months ago, fragments of arguments, jokes, private confessions, all distorted, disembodied, flung back at us from the rock itself. Remember that time on the crane? A faint, distorted echo of Liam's voice whispered, dredging up a memory from years ago, a night we'd almost been caught, a night we'd sworn never to speak of again. Then a whisper, closer now, almost directly in my ear, though Chloe and Liam were yards away. She left you, Ethan. Didn't she? Maria, her name, unspoken, unbidden, echoed in the cavern, a cruel, intimate betrayal. Chloe was becoming visibly agitated. She stopped every few minutes, her head swiveling, eyes wide, flashlight beam darting frantically across the walls. I don't like this, she said, her voice tight with fear. I really don't like this. There's something wrong here. Something listening. Liam, however, was pushing deeper, driven by an almost manic adrenaline. The fear, the strangeness, seemed to be fueling him, pushing him further into the heart of the labyrinth. Come on, guys, he called, his voice echoing ahead into the darkness. Don't be such chickens. We haven't even seen the good stuff yet. The good stuff, as he called it, turned out to be carvings, ancient markings etched into the cave walls. Deeper in the cavern system than we'd ventured before. They weren't natural formations. They were deliberate, intricate, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering beam of our flashlights. What are these? Chloe whispered, her voice hushed with awe and a palpable unease. They depicted figures, grotesque and alien, subterranean deities ripped from the pages of forgotten myths, creatures of the underworld, half human, half stone, with eyes that burned with an unnatural light and mouths that gaped open in silent screams. Beneath them, smaller symbols, more intricate, more disturbing, like the script of a language that predated humanity. The echoes intensified around the carvings, swirling, coalescing, growing louder, more menacing. They morphed again, no longer mimicking, no longer whispering secrets. Now they were voices, disembodied, inhuman, calling our names, whispering threats, echoing screams that seemed to claw their way up from the very depths of the earth. Ethan, a voice rasped. Close, too close. A voice that sounded like my own, twisted and corrupted. Ethan, you're alone now, always alone. The echoes were targeting me, focusing on me, whispering my fears, my insecurities. The raw, gaping wound of my loneliness laid bare in the cold, echoing darkness. Liam. Chloe. I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. Silence. Only the deafening, swirling echoes answered. I was alone, separated from them in the labyrinth, swallowed by the darkness, surrounded by voices that knew my deepest fears, that preyed on my rawest wounds. The cavern had become a living thing, sentient, malicious, and I was trapped within its echoing labyrinth, desperate, disoriented. I did the only thing that seemed to make any sense in the swirling chaos of sound and fear. I followed the loudest echoes. They were like a vortex, pulling me deeper, deeper into the cavern system, promising something. Escape? Or something far worse. The tunnels twisted and turned. The darkness absolute. The echoes growing deafening, a cacophony of voices, whispers, screams, all converging, all drawing me onward. Then the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, a space so immense it felt like the sky had fallen into the earth. We found our way out, guided by a newfound instinct, a primal sense of direction that transcended logic, maps, and fear. The labyrinth yielded, the rock released its hold. We stumbled out of the cave mouth, blinking against the blessedly ordinary sunlight, the world outside sharp, clear, real. Back in daylight we were ghosts of ourselves, shaken, disoriented, stripped bare. We never spoke of what we experienced in Blackwood Caverns. The echoes became a shared, unspoken trauma, a dark secret buried deep within us, like the caverns themselves beneath the earth. We left urban exploring behind. The thrill was gone, replaced by a deep unease, a lingering fear of the darkness, the silence, the echoes. We'd peered into something ancient and malicious, a sentient labyrinth that fed on fear, and we'd escaped somehow. But we knew with a certainty that chilled us to the core that some places are not just dark and empty. Some places are actively, consciously malevolent, and some horrors resonate, not in sight, but in the terrifying, inescapable power of sound. We found our way out, guided by a newfound instinct, a primal sense of direction that transcended logic, maps, and fear. The labyrinth yielded, the rock released its hold. We stumbled out of the cave mouth, blinking against the blessedly ordinary sunlight, the world outside sharp, clear, real. Back in daylight we were ghosts of ourselves, shaken, disoriented, stripped bare. We never spoke of what we experienced in Blackwood Caverns. The echoes became a shared, unspoken trauma, a dark secret buried deep within us, like the caverns themselves beneath the earth. We left urban exploring behind. The thrill was gone, replaced by a deep unease, a lingering fear of the darkness, the silence, the echoes. We'd peered into something ancient and malicious, a sentient labyrinth that fed on fear, and we'd escaped somehow. But we knew with a certainty that chilled us to the core that some places are not just dark and empty. Some places are actively, consciously malevolent, and some horrors resonate, not in sight, but in the terrifying, inescapable power of sound.